To the semifinals of the FIDE Women's Speed Chess Championship 4th Grand Prix leg. I'm here with the one and only, the wonderful Alexandra Botez. Alexandra, how are you feeling about today's matchup? We are going to start with Hou Yifan against Humpy Koneru.
I'm really excited for it. Hou Yifan is always a viewer favorite. Obviously, she's the highest rated player in the entire tournament. Humpy Koneru has had an incredible performance so far, and we saw Hou Yifan yesterday struggle a little bit in the first two games, but then she came back swinging. So I'm really looking forward to that game. What about you, Robert?
Yeah, I think that Yifan, she knows what she needs to do. She needs to win this Grand Prix leg to make it to the Super Final. So I am curious what she has in store against such a tough opponent in Humpy Koneru. Because speaking of comebacks, we talk about how Yifan is back. That's amazing. Everybody's happy to see that. But Humpy took some time off to spend time with her family. Then she came back to the world of chess and came back with a bang and has been nothing but successful in her return. So I do not think this is going to be an easy matchup by any means.
Interesting. So, Humpy, how long of a break did she end up taking?
I want to say like a couple years. I don't remember for certain, but it was quite an extensive break from over-the-board classical play, that's for sure.
And do you think that can ever be helpful, or you're just going to have to come back and catch up to get back to your previous level?
It definitely takes a while because even if you study your openings, you get into that game environment. And so what I say all the time, and you do as well when we commentate. Like when you commentate, and she wasn't even commentating, but you're free flowing. Like if you make a mistake, you take it back. When you're studying chess, you're analyzing a position, you make a mistake, like, oh, shoot, this is what I did wrong. Here's how I can improve that. When you're playing a game, you're like, wait a second, oh no, if I go there, then Alexandra's going to do this, and I can't handle that. Like, I need to be careful. By the way, we do have liftoff, so
Okay.
the matches are starting. I am happy to see that, and we have a little bit of a bishop's opening, and we'll see how both these players handle this because the c6, d5 hasn't played in previous matches. And look at a5 going right after the bishop. Alexandra, what do you make of this opening?
It's really aggressive from Black for sure. She's pushing her pawns really early on. She has huge space advantage on the Black side. I love playing these kinds of openings. It's interesting that we're on move 6 and she's made 5 pawn moves so far. I know usually when we've been teaching people in PogChamps, we tell them to take their pieces out first. But these are the GMs and they're playing at a different level.
They do their thing. They kind of can choose openings that may seem a little shakier, but they have studied them quite extensively. And as you're kind of suggesting, oh, it looks like Black is in danger of overextending, moving the same pawn, a5, a4. But Black has gained pretty important space on the queen side, so that makes her feel like she can press forward. On the flip side of things, though, this pawn on d5, and there we see knight c3, it's staying right at this pawn a third time. And is Black really going to play bishop e6, Alexandra? Because then it looks like White has knight g5 type ideas.
Okay, so knight g5 going directly for the bishop pair, and if Black decides to castle, is it that bad to lose the bishop on e6 if you also get to open up the f-file and bring another pawn in the center?
You're asking some very good questions. I wish I had an immediate, like, oh, for sure that's bad, or, oh, that's actually pretty good. It's one of those positions where I believe it's really a matter of taste. Because having double pawns, for some people, is the end of the world. It's like a total nightmare. For others, as you're pointing out, you're like, wait, you get something in return. And I think that's how you should evaluate chess positions. You should look at things descriptively rather than just being like, I know for certain that has to be bad. No, you should look at the pluses and minuses, because if you're not giving credit where it's due, you're not really playing a full game of chess there. It's not just about what you've benefited from, but also what your opponent may have gained in return.
Well, it seems like she decided her opponent was gaining more from the bishop e6 move, and she decided to take on e4. That's interesting. I guess the pawn on d5 was under attack, and there was no discovery threats with the dark squared bishop. And I like this idea with knight g5. Is she trying to capture back on e4 with a g knight?
Yeah, I guess she didn't want to take back on e4 with the pawn. Instead, now she's putting pressure on e4 with the knight. Of course, Black had to do something about the f7 square, and that is why she castled, because if you take on f7, you give up 2 minor pieces for a rook and a pawn, yes, but the rook is less valuable, especially in a position like this. So that's why black castles into what seems like a potential attack for those of you who may be less experienced, and instead we see a capture on e4. She takes with the c knight, Alexandra, and you know what that says to me? There may be some kind of queen h5 ideas. That's why you take with the less advanced knight, so that when you take on e4 again, perhaps in the future there is this just queen h5 jumping into the attack.
I like that move maybe if you're trying to one-trap your opponent, because I'm guessing she'd have to take with the d-pawn to go for something like that. And then after knight h5, I guess it's annoying because you're attacking h7 and f7, but h6 is coming immediately after if Hou Yifan takes with her pawn, right? And then queen h5 isn't a real threat anymore.
I don't disagree with you. I'm trying to make checkmate happen. I know checkmate doesn't happen just because I want it to happen. But, you know, let a guy...
Robert, quoting Mean Girls doesn't make you hip. You know that, right?
Whoa! Whoa! It's early out here. We were on such good terms until that moment.
Until that moment. It's okay. We're going to spice things up a little bit. No, but your idea of queen h5 is definitely juicy. It just seems a little bit superficial because then the queen is stuck on h5.
Sorry, did you just, like, criticize me and then call me superficial?
I think I called your suggestion superficial, which is more acceptable, right, Robert?
Well, how do you feel that you called the idea superficial and then Yifan, she took back with the pawn on e4, and clearly if you gave her a free move, she would play queen h5 here.
Okay, I'm interested to see what happens. Maybe she took like this for another reason. I mean, she's also opening up the d file, right?
She is indeed. So that leaves the queen on d8 stuck to the defense of that bishop, at least for now. And your move h6, the first move that came to your mind. Sometimes white plays h4 and says, have my knight. Please take that. I'll take back with my pawn. And
you know what, Robert? It seems like your idea was right because she didn't push h6 right away. H4...
Can you repeat that one more time, please?
Bishop e7 was an interesting move here. I do have a question about your h6, h4 idea, though. Doesn't that force Hou Yifan to keep her king in the center?
It would have, but when you put that pawn on h6, you open yourself up to sacrifices and things of that nature, which is why after queen h5, well, you have to now. That's why the point of bishop e7. You simply must take on g5. And note, especially now, with the bishop gone from c1, if black allows, white would like to castle queenside. However, the move queen to d4, for instance, says, you're not castling queenside because you cannot castle through check. The pawn on b2 is under attack. The pawn on e4 is under attack. So I am interested to see how Yifan plans to continue this position. And instead queen a5 check. Instead of playing in the center, she drops her queen over to the queenside. Maybe she thought this tempo was extremely vital.
Maybe she did. And I guess the question for me in positions like this is, without any knights on the board, that's why I'm not convinced by Hou Yifan's queen on h5 initially, at least. But I guess she is putting pressure also on the e5 pawn on f7. So if black wants to defend the e5 pawn with a piece other than her queen, she can't play rook e1 because f7 isn't protected. Knight d7 is going to block her own bishop. So it is actually a bit crippling for black to have to deal with that queen on h5.
It's true. It's attacking a lot, and I guess that's the reason why she played queen to a5 with check, is that if you could kick this rook away from f8, and actually the bishop on g5 was threatening to go to e7, a move like that would be extremely painful for black to meet. And I was suggesting queen to d4, and you can, for those of you watching, see the arrows hitting b2, hitting e4, but the problem, I guess, is bishop e7 would have immediately dislodged the rook on f8 from the pawn on f7's protection. So instead, the queen went out to a5, and bishop to d2, there's still, of course, your queen's under attack, so you're going to have to move your queen out the way. But bishop b4 is a threat as well, hitting this rook on f8. So if you make some kind of move, queen c7 allows bishop b4 to be met with c5, but the point was bishop b4 was a pretty nasty threat. And Alexandra, white could just castle queenside, and I'm a believer in the potential of her attack.
I do like Hou Yifan's position a lot here. I mean, it's an open position, and she has two bishops. If she does castle queenside, black's pawns are going to storm up pretty quickly. You mentioned c5 after bishop b4. What do you think about c5 to bring the knight to c6? I know it's also creating, a light square weakness on d5, but if black's pushing her pawns forward anyway, it seems like it could actually help support the knight that can then eventually go to d4.
I can buy that. It's one of these positions where, to my eyes, it feels... Well, look at Black's time, by the way. I didn't even talk about that, did I? She's down to 20 seconds.
Oh, wow. Okay, you're right. I just noticed that as well. I mean, you give all of this insightful commentary, and at least I always try to keep an eye on the clock, but I didn't this time.
It was a role reversal. You were giving very insightful commentary, and then I was like, hey, let's look at the clock for a second, because Black is 20 seconds to Yvonne's 2 minutes. And Alexandra, actually, I really appreciate what you said with c5 knight to c6, because I think that's somewhat hard for some people to do, because you're like, wait, my pawns are kind of not coordinated very well, then it looks like I'm moving all over the place. But bringing the knight out to c6 makes a ton of sense. You're in a more active square, it leaves the d file open for your rooks. And this bishop e6 move, we talked about it in a different variation, but it still shows Black has the double isolated e-pawns. If you can't win them, they don't look good, but they're probably not the end of the world. So I actually like what Humpy has done, all things considered. I still, of course, prefer Hou Yifan's position, though.
Of course. I mean, Humpy is a little bit behind in development. She has a weaker king and a weaker pawn structure. Not to mention 18 seconds on the clock, but Hou Yifan is getting lower as well. And I feel like she's made progress. She's traded off one of the bishops, which was a little bit more concerning. Is she going to lose that e5 pawn? Maybe not, because it could be attacked twice by the queen and the bishop, and also defended twice by the queen and the knight.
And your move c5 coming to knight c6 was played. Oh, I like that move, queen d3, saying go knight c6. I'll trade queens with you because my pawn structure is better. So queen d7 or queen d6 here. I guess Black would have not traded and went queen to b6, which is why she put a queen on c4, hitting this pawn on c5 and this targeting e6. And what do you make of this? I mean, you're right that it looks like White is also getting in a bit of a time crunch. Not too bad just yet, but I feel like there's potential for some attack. Bring that knight to d4. That's where that knight's going.
Well, it's one of those games where Hou Yifan definitely had the better opening, and Humpy probably noticed that, and she's slowly trying to basically get out of the bind she was in the opening. And she's made a lot of progress here. And she decided to give up a pawn, but it's a pawn that is actually opening up a semi-open file on the white king. So maybe there is going to be compensation for that.
Oh, yeah, and Black would love to play c4 next after e5, protecting the d4 pawn, so queen z4 plugs the square, but maybe b5 is Black's next move. You said, hey, let's sacrifice one pawn, the a pawn, let's sacrifice the b pawn as well, and get our rooks into the party. Here it comes.
There we go, rook e1.
Trying to play for b5.
So Hou Yifan doesn't allow her, but now the clock, which I'm paying attention to, thank you for pointing it out, Robert, is tied. And Humpy takes that pawn. Okay, I'm always skeptical of taking pawns that are going to open up anything on my king side in time pressure, just because I think it allows opportunities for blunders. But it seems like she calculated this out. Obviously, rook h1 doesn't work right away, but it might in the future.
Oh, 2.1 seconds left for Yifan. Barely got that off. c4 is a great move. Queen c6. Swing the queen over. a4 is falling, and then rook to 8.
Oh, no. Oh, no. I think... Okay, Hou Yifan just got back over 2 seconds.
But, I mean, her king may not get back into this one. I mean, it's in the center of the board, and it looks like there should be close to a mating attack. Nothing concrete just yet, and you have to move.
Just gonna flag.
Oh, she blundered a queen with 1 second left.
She didn't take it. Oh, because
queen takes e1.
They're so low on time. They're so low on time.
Oh my gosh, that was something you don't see every day. But the end of that game, I mean, it was, I think, honestly...
Well, Robert, that's something I see every day. Hang on.
Queen e3, just putting the queen in harm's way. With so little time, Humpy just takes on c4. It's completely winning for Black. The attack is crashing through, and after queen takes e1, there's queen a1 checkmate to boot. So let's move on to the second game here. Humpy with some great defense there. She had 20 seconds to Yifan's 2 minutes and a worse position, yet she was the one who was playing accurately there and scored a full point. Alexandra, that was extremely impressive.
Yeah, I see a lot of myself in Humpy's playing style. Kind of weird opening there. It was not an orthodox. Just pushed all the pawns, got into a bad position, down on dime, and then somehow get a little bit comfortable, lucky, and flag your opponent.
I guess that's a compliment to your playing style, that you play similarly to Humpy Canero. She's pretty strong, you know?
I mean, I play similar to her when she has a lucky win. So I'm not trying to compliment
I feel
myself
like
like that.
you're her second biggest fan besides the one on her side.
Well, she has a new fan after that game, that's for sure. I mean, I was already a fan, but even bigger. So let's take a look here. So we have a Queen's Gambit declined. Can you explain the difference between Bishop E2 and Bishop D3 in these kinds of positions?
Sure. So bishop on e2. In the case of d takes c4, you will want to capture back on c4, very likely anyway. But there are times with the bishop on d3, you have to take back on c4 because your bishop would be under attack on d3. With the bishop on e2, you don't necessarily have to react in that immediate moment, which can be useful in some lines if you want to play a3 to kick this bishop away and try to take on c4 with the queen. So that's just like a little bit of something there that to consider. It's really not the biggest thing in the world. It just is something to keep in your mind. Also, in the case of e5 for black, sometimes that's a little bit dangerous for white if you're breaking the position open. Here it doesn't work anyway because the d5 pawn is under attack. But just one of those things where it's a little thing, just kind of early in the opening, may not be too consequential. It's just one of those kind of move order situations.
And that's helpful because intuitively it looks like d3 is a better diagonal. It's not, the bishop isn't blocked by any pieces. But then often in these Queen's Gambit positions, you see bishop e2 played instead.
Is that the wambulance in your background?
Yeah, maybe it's gonna make its way over to your side of the city.
Just, I heard it and I was like, is that me? And it doesn't sound like it's on my end.
Yeah. There's just so many of them.
So a5 played just now by Ifan with the black pieces, and this knight on c3 is pinned, right? So a4 does become something that white needs to keep an eye on, as that would attack the queen and the knight can't take it because the king is still on e1. So I imagine that Humpy wants to castle kingside here. What else could she be thinking about, Alexandra?
I mean, a3 she's gonna play at some point, and it's always tempting to play it after a5 because the bishop can't go back to a5 right away, although I guess she can play a3, a4, so that's still a little bit tricky.
That's a really instructive thing that you're pointing out. So why don't you elaborate a little bit on that pawn structure?
Yeah, the pawn structure after a3, a4?
Yeah.
So the issue, and this is something you often see black trying to do, bait the opponent into playing a3 so that they can reply with a4, because then after the bishop moves away, basically the pawn on b2 is stuck.
Yep.
So you have to be a little bit careful with those. But it does work in some positions. Like if you're able to get a bishop in exchange, and it can sometimes make sense. But she castled, so I'm going to assume it wasn't the right call here.
Yeah, it could have been. She spent quite a bit of time coming up with the move castle. She spent a full minute on the clock, actually. And I really think that's such a good example of how when one pawn kind of stops two, with this situation with a3 and a4 happening. So I think that's always good to discuss. Now, with the king safely tucked on g1, the d5 pawn is once on track. And look at them a4. So that's really interesting to me because my first question, Alexandra, is can I actually take that pawn? As normally you would have a discovery moving your knight out of the way from c6, but your bishop on b4 would lose its defender. So knight takes a4 is the first thing I'm considering here.
Yeah, are there any tactics thereafter? Maybe with like moving the knight to some discovery attack? Well, unfortunately, if the knight from c6 moves, then the bishop is also unprotected. But sometimes you just sacrifice a pawn on the queen side to open up some files and get some play. Could that be the reason?
Yeah, I think here it actually does work because knight takes e4, there's knight takes... Well, no, I don't have that move. I wanted to play like knight takes d4, but I'm not buying that either. Maybe pawn takes c4 works out, and you're just trying to create havoc for this queen. And you're just... I don't know. I'm not totally buying it. I'm being honest with you. I feel like it's one of those things where you can take it and either you pay the full price, and we as commentators pay nothing. It's a free mission for us to steal pawns like that. For
steal
Humpy,
pawns, suggest crazy ideas, and let the players deal with the consequences.
For Humpy, she's just like, why not? I trust Ifan. She's pretty strong. Let me just retreat my queen. And also, she didn't need to be so forceful, as after d takes c4, the pawn d5 was under attack. You have two pawns in the center for white, and just one for black, right? The e6 pawn versus the e3, d4 dynamic. You're a d4 player yourself. I'm sure you're happy to have the extra centralized pawn.
Yeah, it's great to have that extra pawn on d4, but it's a little bit weird because I can't push e4 and get more space in the center. It's kind of a stuck pawn. So you get the center from now, but it's harder to come up with a long-term plan. I mean, where's white trying to expand here? Okay, knight e4. So instead of expanding with pawns in the center, white's trying to find play by moving the knight around and gaining space and using that square where its pawn could have been in other variations.
Yeah, and the knight on e4 was immediately attacking the queen on f6, and it also has the c5 square potentially. This bishop on b4 now is not attacking anything. It's going to have to drop back, as it just did, to d6. And one of the big questions I'm having now is black going to try to play e5? It's a very committal move, and it changes the pawn structure. But what do you think of the e5 for Yifan right now?
Oh, I guess she didn't go for it. But she's preparing e5 at some point. It seems like Black's main pawn break, other than c5, which you see in other Queen's gambits, which kind of brings to the next point. So I guess Black is playing for expanding on e5, and White is playing on the semi-open c file. Does that seem correct?
For sure. White would like to make use of that. The bishop on d6 is doing a good job of making the c file not as consequential because it protects c7. Although with the knight on e4, naturally you can take that bishop on d6 and then try to get a piece into the c7 square. So knight f3 to d2 was played. And this is an interesting position because usually we talk about the bishops being advantageous over knights. I think, Alexandra, we can agree here that the knights are looking pretty good compared to the bishops because the bishops don't have open diagonals to work with.
Yeah, for now though. So bishop c6, she's trying to put the bishops on those longer diagonals. Um, and if the knight moves from e4, it's also going to give up that g5 square. So maybe the queen can come back and get involved on the attack.
And actually, bishop takes h2 check was a threat, which is why she brought her knight back to d2 from c4, which makes me question knight f3 to d2 in the first place, because I don't think this was like her main strategy. The point that I was just about to make was that bishop takes h2 was a tactic. Let's say you made some random move, because after queen h4 check, the knight on e4 is attacked twice and only defended once. And that's why she retreated her knight to defend that square. And after f5, we see this bishop on c6 now is on an open diagonal. Alexandra, your queen g5, of course, is in the mix. Rook f6 with the rook lift. I feel like at first glance, I like that bishop on c6, but can white just play f... Well, she answered the question, f3
and then e4 and completely
bishop
block up
b5!
the position. Oh,
Bishop
no.
b5!
Ah, she tricked her. Honestly, she tricked me too there. Knight c4 doesn't work because there's d5 pinning the knight, so she's going to be down in exchange. And Humphrey is once again way down on the clock here, 13 seconds.
It's been a theme of the match thus far, with Yifan just playing much more quickly than her opponent. Humphrey did survive that last game, and rook c8 here. Trade off this queen for the two rooks. This is great for black because you actually have a target on b2 and another target on d4. So a move like queen to b3 here, for instance, threatens queen d1, takes d4. You just here you're mopping up the pawns.
You certainly are mopping up the pawns, and your king is also protected. So, I mean, sometimes a rook and a knight can work very well in coordination, but it's just too slow here. Like knight takes d6, rook c7, knight e8 if the queen isn't there. But there's no time to do it.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of no time, Yifan made quick work. It's queen d7 actually wins a piece because the knight can't stay on d6. And if the knight moves, you lose the rook. So you just lost a piece, and with it, the game.
Yeah, I think we're gonna see the the resignation there. Okay, do you think we're gonna see the same opening, the aggressive pawn pushing? I think she's gonna mix it up.
She's going to mix it up? Well, what's she going to do instead for us? I mean, here it goes.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Sorry, wait, Alexandra, what did you say? Remind me of what you just said, please.
She's gonna mix it up after the first couple moves is I think what I was going for there.
Oh, okay. Is that
Yeah.
really what you're going for? Or you're
Yeah,
just saying that?
just to clarify. No, I thought that opening didn't work out too well for her, so I'm actually surprised that she's going for the same one. Although from what I've seen in a lot of these tournaments, players often repeat lines. They're just much more comfortable with them.
Yeah, and they often have like 3 different variations in a given line that they can choose from. So actually, did you notice that in this game you found a4 rather than a3? Remember, black had that pawn on a4 pretty early, kicking the bishop back to a2. Here, Yifan herself, she went a4, saying you're not getting that advance, but at the same time that gives control of a square like b4 to black.
Yeah, and now the bishop can never be kicked from that square. Bishop g5. Okay, bishop g4. She has both of her bishops developed. She's pinning the knight on f3, and it's not a pin that she can easily put more pressure on. For example, if her knight was able to come to c6 and to d4, that might be a little bit more annoying. Regardless, Hui Fan wants to push that bishop back. And now the question is, should she take the knight and give up the bishop pair, but keep a close position where knights are usually better, or retreat with bishop h5 and keep the tension?
She takes, and I was going to say I would probably take because bishop h5, pawn g4 worries me, and it's a situation where she's like, all right, I don't want to have to think about a pawn storm. Let me just take on f3 and then play d4. She gains space in the center. I once again have this question, though, about this knight on b8. Is she just going to play knight a6 here and either go to c5 or replace the bishop on b4? Or is she going to go for the c5, knight c6 again?
She's going to go for knight d7. She's just bringing in another defender. So e5 is now protected. Knight c5 can hop there into the future. In the future. It's a nice close position where she's playing with the knights. I mean, that being said, the bishop on b3, despite it being closed, is on the best diagonal for that bishop. So I do like that part of Hui Fan's position. But how does Hui Fan try and open this up more?
Well, she'll have to play for f4, it feels like, right? To move the queen, say, to g3 and try to, or f5 and try to play f4 to open up this rook on f1. You point out the bishop is on its best square, and why would that be? It's a pretty long diagonal, and it's staring at the end of it on the f7 pawn. So with that in mind, if I could play f2 to f4 right now, if I could jump over my queen, I'm opening up this f-file for my rook, for my queen, trying to increase pressure on black's king side. So that's what I would play for. It takes a couple turns. Of course, you have to move your queen out the way first. And for black, I'm looking at trying to play b5. And if I can get this move b5 in, I'm just going after the bishop on c4. So maybe even knight takes a4, by the way, is a possibility. And after rook takes a4, then b5 with a fork.
Interesting. But wouldn't black end up having a worse pawn structure there? Because then you have an isolated a pawn.
Yes.
I'd be worried about the pawn structure in that situation.
You're completely right. The knight would replace the bishop on c4, even pawns, but the pawn a5, the pawn e5, both would be weak. I'm with you.
Yeah. Well, okay, so queen g3 is making space for the f pawn to move forward. So that is the plan she's going for. And after f4, how would you rate white's attacking chances? Is that something that Humpy should be intimidated about? Or maybe that's just like a longer term play?
f4 is both a good move in the sense that it can increase pressure for white on the king side, but also a bad move in that it will likely free up the e5 square for black's knight. And note that white has a light square bishop, so if I can plant a knight on e5, I have two knights. So even if eventually after f4, if I get the trade and put a knight on e5, to put your knight on f3, I can stunt double and replace my knight on e5 with my second knight. So the dark square control is actually something commonly seen in the Caro Kann opening. Some of the closed lines result in positions like this. So that's something that I would keep deeper in my mind.
So f4, e takes... Okay, so knight f3 was just played. Never mind. Okay, so the pawn on e5 is attacked. I mean, Humpy wanted to move her queen up at some point anyway to continue development. And I guess... Queen f6 or queen e7? Queen e7 seems more natural to me, but queen f6 could probably try and be a little bit more defensive here. Do you think there's much of a difference between those two moves?
It's interesting to me that you didn't mention f6 as well, and I think that's because you didn't want to open up the full lane for the bishop, which is, I also don't want to open it up. So I was with you, but just interesting at a higher level where you're a strong player, so you're not thinking of f6 because it looks too weakening, right?
Right.
And
it also takes a square away from your knight, and it's committal.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I just want to point out that f6 was also a move that protected the center. And some people are like, I want to protect my pawn with another pawn. That's what all these players always tell me, right? A pawn's best friend is another pawn. But here in this position, if you had played f6, I'm also worried at some point, like I have a knight h4, knight g6 checkmate. And I just want to show people what that looks like.
Yeah.
Knight g6 check, your king has no moves you have to take. Queen h4 says, thank you for the game. Your king has no move. So just showing why opening the full length of that diagonal could backfire. And actually, we see knight h4 anyway, which just goes to show that not playing f6 is certainly a good thing.
Yeah, and g6 I like because if you have to push any pawn in front of your king, you want to push the pawn that was on a dark square, because now you have weaker dark squares, but white doesn't have a dark squared bishop. The knight can't as easily hop around there. It's holding the f5 square. But I like that Hou Yifan now went for f4, because if black doesn't take, then she has f5, which is challenging that pawn on g6.
Yeah, no, you make a really good point there about the dark squares being the quote unquote problem. But we talked about this e5 square, didn't we? And here comes the first black knight into e5. Won't be surprised if the second one replaces it later.
Yeah, that sounds fair. And I was just looking, is the a4 pawn... Okay, I'm kind of a greedy pawn grabber. The pawn on a4 isn't protected, and I see that there's some discovery ideas, like bishop takes f7, but then there's another pawn hanging on b2. I wouldn't play it in my own game because I'd be afraid of the attack, especially with being 2 minutes down on the clock, but she goes for it.
Have no fear, Humpy is here, and Alexandra, with your guidance, she's playing these moves. She's just like, let me take that pawn. And as you're pointing out, there's no clear way for white to take advantage. Normally, bishop takes f7 would be a check, but the king's already on h8, so the pawn on b2 is also under attack. And even if not, you've stolen a pawn, it would be a trade. So knight f3 was chosen by Yifan, putting pressure on e5, putting pressure on the pawn on d4. I feel like Humpy's position must be better, once again. However, clock.
Okay, Robert. Man of the people once again. 43 seconds here. But actually, I was about to say this is better than we've usually seen her with her time management, but she's been getting to the 20-second range when Hou Yifan is in the 1-minute range. So yeah, this has been the same pattern. Third game, she's really struggling with the time, which makes me worry for her when she's going to have shorter time controls. Okay, good to see chat is awake.
They're certainly awake. Yep, they are. And f6 play to reinforce this knight on e5 so that you can even take back with the pawn. I think that you often want to keep pieces on... Ooh, wait. I mentioned the d4 pawn hanging before, then I kind of thought you couldn't take it because queen c5 exactly was just played. And I guess queen f2, just dropping that back. But now after knight takes b2, there's knight takes d3 ideas.
Right, and then you are forking. But there's also knight e6, which is a fork back, but not really, because then you can take the queen on f2.
Although knight e6 will probably dislodge the rook from f8. So I like knight e6 a lot, because the queen trade is fine for white, as black has several weak pawns that she needs to take care of. I actually think that that would be a good move here.
This is a tied match so far, 1-1. Humpy has 25 seconds, a position that we felt was slightly better. Who would you rather play as at this point?
I'd play with the time, for sure.
You play with the time. Okay,
Yeah.
and you have knight e6, which looks like a hard move to deal with.
Yeah, because it sort of forces the queen trade as far as I see. And once the queens come off, there'll be rook to b1 at the end of these lines. The b7 pawn's weak. The f7, excuse me, the f6, I said f7, pawn is one that is on a dark square and still not easy to keep defended. I like black's pawn on a5, the outside pass pawn, but we're about to see some exchanges. So let's see how this one goes, Alexandra.
Okay, rook f7. It's the only square where she could move her rook and continue defending f6.
Knight c5. Isn't the knight on b2 trapped?
Yeah, she's taking away the a4 pawn. Can she play a4 and a3? No, because the rook is under attack. Ooh.
Here's rook b1, and then b6 is the only move to save the knight because you're kicking the knight on c5 out. Then white just goes back knight e6.
And she's going to lose an exchange.
Exactly.
Yikes.
Oh. Okay, she's trying to make the best of a bad position, but rook d2 now goes up a rook for just 3 pawns. And we do a quick math check. 3 pawns is 3 points, a rook is 5. That should be good for white, and I know point values that we learn aren't always applicable. Here it is. The rook on d2 is on an open file. The bishop is very strong. If you ever take my bishop, we're liquidating into more of an endgame where white is up material. So I do think that this game should be an easy conversion for Yifan.
Yeah, because it's not just an exchange. That's as if she has a rook for 3 pawns, and usually when you have a piece for any amount of pawns, it's just easier to go and win that material back. I mean, on top of what you already have.
Indeed. And all right, so bishop...
Robert, it's so nice to have one viewer today.
I'm glad that I'm doing the spectating and you're doing the commentating.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a good day for me.
There you go. Okay, so Humpy really suffering with her time here. I like that she's still going for it. She does have those two pass pawns. Are you concerned for her when we start seeing the 3-0 portion? Because this is the last one in the 5-1.
I'm concerned for pretty much anybody who's facing Hou Yifan. If I'm
Yeah.
being honest, she's such a strong player and she's found her stride. This is the final game of the 5-minute portion, so Humby's nothing to lose. She loses the game regardless if she resigns or ends up losing it 20 moves from now. And this was good technique there. The bishop covers all of the squares. Knight d3 protects the pawn for one move. You're not getting anything out of this. So just move the bishop back and then start taking all of the pawns to the queen side.
Yeah, this is tough. I mean, this is lost, not tough. But I guess she's just playing it out there. Oh, and we have Hou Yifan on the camera. Very focused.
Did you just notice that she was on camera?
Yeah, I just noticed because I'm not seeing it most of the time.
Okay. No, it's fine. I'm not judging you for it. She's been on for a while, so.
Got it. What time is it for her actually?
Probably like 9 p.m. or something.
All right, so not too bad. And I guess that they're playing in like the same time zone almost, so that's good to have it on equal footing.
Indeed. And it has been equal footing thus far, 1-1, but unless something goes awry for Yifan, it's about to be 2-1. However, it seems like it's been a little more tricky than I thought. This knight is just protecting the pawns here. And in order for white to win, you need to do something. Maybe she'll play rook a5 check and then even sacrifice the rook for the knight, because that's actually, that she does it. That's
okay.
Something I wouldn't recommend for our less advanced viewers. But with a player of Yifan's level, she knows for certain that this is a winning position, and we'll see exactly how she does. She'll move her bishop away, then move her king in, and then she'll get a zugzwang. And, okay, now she just wins the pawn. And she'll bring her king into h4, to g5, to f6, and win the remaining pawn.
Right, and having that extra piece, the bishop, is so helpful because you could always use it to push back your opponent's king or protect your own pawn, so very straightforward win there. Okay, so 2-1 for the 5-1 portion.
It is 2-1 for Yifan. This game will be canceled in a second. And there it is. And so we have the time being up. So we're going to take a break. But before we do, Alexandra, any kind of quick thoughts on what we should expect in the 3+1 time segment and what Humpy can do to keep herself in the match?
Well, maybe she's going to mix up her black openings. I guess she did get a better position there. I think Hou Yifan is still going to be the favorite, and we're going to see Humpy struggling even more with the time situation. She's already struggling, and now she's going to have 2 minutes less.
For sure. And Yifan, she jetted out of there. She's ready for a break. We should be too. We will be back shortly with the next time control of this FIDE Chess.com Women's Speed Chess Championship action. Enjoy yourselves. It is Friday, TGIF.
Oh, yeah.
TGI Chess as well. I got to bounce after saying that. It's time to go.
Let's go, Robert. Run.
And we return here. I want to show everybody the standings, the leaderboard of what we have. Anna Ushanina actually has qualified her way to the super final because she is tied with Valentina Gunina in terms of total Grand Prix points. However, by the second tiebreak, she has a single extra game point. Alexandra, that's so sad for Gunina at this point, but Gunina's still in if neither Kosenyuk, Yifan, or Sara Karamel-Sharia win this Grand Prix leg.
But if they do, then how many points do they get for the victory?
They get 12 points.
Okay, so they're going to catch up, and then it's going to look on the tie breaks, which I guess we'd have to wait and see what it would be.
Yeah, it's 12 points for first place with $3,000 per individual Grand Prix leg. There's 8 points for second and $2,000. So good prizes, but at this point in time, they're all caring about those 12 points. Because as we go back to the leaderboard, Alexandra Kostenyuk, if she gets the 12, she is in ahead of everybody. She's the number one. And then Yifan and Sarah will tie. And we do have games, so I'm going to take us back to the games here, just starting. And Yifan with the black pieces. She is playing this setup very calmly in the center, and Humpy is playing for a queenside fianchetto. Do you think that Humpy feels pressure already, or is she just still doing her thing and is waiting for the best chess to be played by her?
Well, whenever you talk to these top players, they give you the same line about how they're just trying to be focused on the game and not let the nerves get to them. So I'm going to guess that she's feeling okay. She's only down by 1 point, and I just want to see her manage her time a little bit better. For example, she spent 19 seconds on playing G3 on move 5 in a theoretical opening, and that's concerning to me already.
It is concerning, for sure. And she can't afford to do that. The good news is you can't be 2 minutes down. Well, not really in a 3-minute game. That's pretty hard to do. So she has been down multiple minutes in multiple games. That's, as we're talking here, it's not a strategy that's going to win you a match against Ho Yifan. I actually think you need to play very rapidly against her and maintain a lead on the clock.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely correct. But in terms of her position here, it's very solid. She played with the white pieces, and she doesn't have any pawn in the center, but she has those two fianchetto bishops. And the question is, what pawn is she going to go for? Is she going to play e4 or d4? I think she played d4 because e4 would have left almost a backwards pawn on e2.
Yeah, d4 is just a move to try to take claim in the center, offer pawn exchanges, and as you were saying, e4, it's maybe too soon. Sometimes you do want to play that e4 move. You're right, and it actually may be played in the future. But for now, she says, let me strike first in the center, and white is one tempo ahead in development. Both sides have 3 minor pieces out, and because white moves first, you typically get that little half step in development. So the question, Alexandra, I'm about to ask you is, where does this knight on b1 belong?
Does it go on c3 or d2 is the question. It feels like if it comes to c3, it'll just be traded off and open the light square bishop for Ho Yifan. But I guess Humpy is fine with those trades. I don't know. I usually play knight d2 in those positions because it also supports e4. Your knight can hang to c4, go to c4 after. But I think both were fine.
Yeah, they were. It's a matter of taste, which is why I kind of asked you. And you said, I like knight d2, and I can maneuver my knight to c4 perhaps. And here we see a knight exchange. And when I look at positions like this, I know that some people think, oh, we're going to get some trades, we'll make it a symmetrical pawn structure, that should just be heading towards a draw. But one of the most important things I learned a very long time ago when analyzing just a random game at a tournament with some players is they start talking about squares. And Yasser Seirawan, who many people know is a great commentator and a chess champion in his own right when he used to play, he would always talk about squares. And I look at squares like A3, squares like B5, and can I get my pieces to those squares? And I know that seems far out, and like, Robert, what are you talking about? But let's say black takes on d4, and I take with my knight on d4, and we trade these light square bishops. Is that beneficial for white's progress on the queen side over there? Certainly looks that way to me.
Squares, yeah. I'll have what Yasser's having, Robert.
That was pretty good.
Thanks, Robert. But It's true. It's true. I like the way you actually explain that here. I honestly find this position very dry. The only real difference, I mean, there's a bishop on e7 instead of the bishop on b2. Um, I don't know. Would you have a preference for who you like playing this with better?
Well, White's bishop on b2 looks better than the bishop on e7 to me, so I prefer White's position. And I don't mean to rain on your parade there. It just feels like there's more life to the position than most would give it credit for. And I would say, even myself, that I fall victim to the it's just not much going on mentality. And then when I put on my commentating hat, I'm just like, let's look for every single possibility out there.
That's the way you should do it. And you're right, there are going to be a lot more complexities. It's just in terms of finding plans. They're so slow. That's why I'm kind of calling it dry, right? I mean, you have to make a move like queen e3, which usually you don't put your queen in front of the pawns. It looks like maybe knight g4 could come. It's a lot of just rerouting and being very patient.
So, do you have a problem with patience?
I'm just saying, sometimes it's faster to throw things and hope it sticks in terms of what I like watching. But no, I mean, it is a good way to play chess.
By the way, Humpy's down a minute on the clock.
That I'm not surprised. 18 seconds when Hou Yifan has a minute and 15. It seems like any time control, we keep getting to this position.
And we have more clarity than we did before. Mm-hmm. And for Yifan, with that extra time, she's using it wisely right here. You could trade on c1, which just doesn't. You play rook c8 next if you want to trade all this stuff off. After knight d5, I thought that White could take on d5 and try to land this rook on c7. Instead, she was queen f3, which is also annoying. And then a pin. Wait, knight takes d5 is possible. Take on d.
Knight takes d5.
Oh, knight takes d5 was possible because if I can't show it right now, I'll show it after the game. If Black took the rook on c1, there was discoveries to win the Black queen on b7. So this actually looks much nicer for Black.
Okay, so they liquidated instead. Now White has that kind of weird pawn structure by her king side and weak light squares. But I mean, the king is going to be able to hide on h2. Bishop takes f6 will be a threat if the Black knight ever moves. I guess both sides have to be a little bit careful here, because if White has her pieces on the queen side, there's always ideas like queen c2 that you have to be careful about, right?
You do. And this is a great decision by Yifan to bring her knight back to e7 after protecting everything on the king side. Now that pawn h5 may have run a little too far because it requires the queen's defense there. And look at Yifan just making progress. Ooh, g4, what a risky move to play.
Right, she's really opening up her king here. And do you think she's playing a little bit risky given that she has 4 seconds?
Yeah, she doesn't have much of a choice. She's nervous. You barely have any time. I thought queen d3 check would have been played instead of a5. This is ensuring that Black will never lose this game. Your queen protects everything. There are no weak pawns for Black here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now we just have queens. But it's still a little bit tricky because I actually, even if Black wins the a2 pawn, Black's never going to win the b3 pawn.
Yeah, I actually don't like what Yifan did because she moved her queen away from her pawns. Her queen was perfectly...
But don't flag! Oh, she hit point 2.
Oh, queen b7. She now she can just take on b6. And actually, she's the one up a pawn, is Humpy Canera here. Oh, gosh. Maybe I spoke too soon. It looked like Black had a position she could never lose, and now she's much worse. Just check, go back to g6, just gain some time real quick. She's doing that. Mm-hmm. And g5.
Okay, but how does White convert this to a win? Because White's extra pawn is on the queen side, and it's going to be almost impossible to push it forward without losing it.
This one pawn takes care of 2. Good point there. And we're seeing a trade. Oh, that's how you win. Trade the queens, and the White king gets first.
Ah, she tricked her.
Here comes the king.
I mean, Hou Yifan could have prevented that, right? But she just had too little time.
Well, it's funny that we're saying that Yifan had too little time because Humpy was the one who was struggling throughout, and yet Humpy has been really an amazing defender with minimal time on her clock. Something is going right for her in some of these time scrambles.
Wow, that was a comeback. Okay, she's playing the same opening. I'm just going to assume she'll keep doing it. Bishop d6.
Yeah, this time, okay, interestingly enough, Yifan went a3 like she did in the first game, rather than going a4 like she did in the third game. So why does she keep flip-flopping between a3 and a4 for white?
Right. I guess it either implies that she liked the position. I mean, the position she got in the first game with a3 was the superior position. So it does make sense that between the two lines, she would go back to the one that she got the most comfortable opening position out of, or even just to mix them up.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. She probably has. Oh, this bishop e6 move has happened, so we can get this knight g5 that we spoke about very early. It's probably the first actual variation we talked about today. And instead she takes on d5, which means she can castle, try to play rook e1 and put pressure on e5, or at some point play knight to b5. She has options with both knights, to attack the bishops. So I think she'll castle and then choose which bishop to go after.
All right, and those two pawns in the center, do you think they're a strength or a weakness here?
I've highlighted them in red for the moment just because I feel like they are sticking out and possible to attack quite easily. Though if they get to remain there for a while, they're doing a great job of restricting white's pieces. So white can attack them, but white can't go around them. So there's no knight e4 type of moves. There's no knight d4 type of moves. It feels like they are doing good work in the center. However, I'm looking at a knight g5 or a knight to b5, and that could collapse black center.
Right. But at the same time, it would a move like knight g5, if she ever takes on e6, it'd also bring another pawn into the center.
It's true. You're definitely not wrong. And bishop g5 was played to create a pin on the knight, and that means the d5 pawn now is really under attack.
And how do you defend it? Because okay, so you defend it by moving your queen out of the pin and putting some pressure on b2. If bishop takes f6, then she can recapture with her other knight, so just bring back that piece, defend d5. Is b2 actually hanging, though?
She says yes. I wasn't so positive myself, but it probably was. Because after the pawn on b2 was captured, the knight on c3 also would have been under attack, and so she decides just to defend it, although this rook on b1 looks a little silly.
It does, but it was probably the best option there, other than, I mean, no, queen c1 is too awkward of a square. You want to move the queen up a little bit more. But I guess the problem with b2 is that the knight on c3 would be hanging, so there'd be no way to recapture back on b7.
Right.
Now, I really love the idea of Humpy just bringing her rook on e8 and d8 and somehow being able to support those two central pawns. And even though they should be something like hanging pawns, I don't see Hou Yifan successfully poking them yet.
I don't either, and this actually is setting it up, because if white gets a free move, bishop takes f6. If you take with the knight on f6 from d7 to protect the d5 pawn, then e5 loses its second defender. So actually rook e1 sets up an immediate attack, and honestly black can consider moves like knight to g4 as well, and d4 at any moment can be played for black, saying I'll give you my bishop on e6, doubling my own pawns to open up the f-file. You talked about this idea early on. I think that Humpy is doing well on the board, but once again, do me a favor, Alexandra, look at her time.
52 seconds to a minute 35. I think that's an improvement for Humpy, actually. I think this is better. Is this not progress?
It is progress, but I think a little more progress needs to be made, because as we continue to get into the quicker and quicker time controls, later we'll have bullet, I am worried about how she's doing when it comes to clock management.
Yeah, and I keep thinking now what's going to happen in the bullet portion. It's just going to get even scarier here. But then I saw the way she played bullet that last game, even when she was in time pressure, and somehow she has that clutch gene, you know?
It does seem to be the case, and she was pretty clutch yesterday against Valentina Gunina, so she's proven that she can beat even the best challengers in these matches. And right now, Yifan has a pretty critical decision to make. Is she going to take this knight on f6, which says you need to protect your d5 pawn? However, if you do that by capturing with your knight on f6, your e5 pawn is one that white can immediately capture. So it's a pretty interesting tactical dynamic right now, and I think that Yifan is worried about this queen on b6, bishop on c5 lining up on the pawn on f2. So there are like counter tactics available for black.
Yeah. Knight takes e5. the knight is pinned, but where can the bishop go? And even if the bishop moves away, the knight is still defended. Okay, so she decided not to take. But the pawn is still attacked 3 times, so she cannot defend it even if she wants to. Instead, she decides to push the pawn. But again, she's pushing the pawn on a square where it can be captured. I'm guessing she thinks she'll get enough counterplay because now actually knight takes e4 doesn't work. Knight takes e4, queen takes e4 because the bishop is attacking f2. Oh, that's look how nicely coordinated they are. Sorry, I went a little long there.
No, you're good. I was drawing arrows. The bishop on a2, the pawn on f2, both under attack now. If that knight on c3, and actually white is the one down at the time. How does Humpy do this?
That's what I mean. She gets in time pressure, and then she's used that time well to get in the positions where she's used that time to get a better position. She knows how to play it. Although now that I say that, I'm afraid of making predictions like this, Robert. You remember what happens every time I say something like that.
I certainly remember. Here comes the knight to f4, but then Yifan will play queen to c4. So maybe just taking on c3 is actually good here. It is very tempting to continue with your plan to bring knight to f4. She instead changes her mind, which is smart, takes in c3. Now white's pawn structure is bad, and 3 seconds left for Yifan when she played rook to a1. It's now purely a bullet match, and rook d2. Play rook d2. Oh, she missed a great opportunity for a winning tactic.
That was a sneaky tactic. With 9 seconds, do you think she could have calculated it all and she just didn't think the idea?
She definitely could have, but she's such a good position that she just stole an a pawn and is just pushing that down the board. So she's objectively in a winning position regardless. However, with 5 seconds left, it makes me a little nervous. And oh my gosh, 1.9. These players. Ooh. We have a win on the clock.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Humpy is really, really impressive. I must say. I've learned my lesson. If she's down on the clock, I'm choosing her to win the game.
Do you think she's been getting or outplaying Hou Yifan a little bit in the middle game?
Oh, she definitely has. In fact, in that game, it was like a position where black was... We talked about it. The center was either a strength or it was pawns that were going to be vulnerable. She said, why not both? It looks vulnerable. My opponent's going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out if she can take one of those pawns. And then I'm going to push my pawns forward and win the game. And that was really nicely done by the Indian Grandmaster.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have another Queen's Gambit. She's obviously a Queen's Gambit player here. Last time we saw her develop with something like Bishop e2, which I imagine we can see in the future. Rook c1 first, so that if Bishop takes the knight, then she can recapture with the rook and not double her pawns. And on top of that, the c-file is bound to open up at some point, so she's already preparing for that.
True story. And she is ahead after the opening. That's one of the first times I've seen that. And Yifan plays rook to d8. She's protecting d5 in advance. So in the event of pawn to a3, she doesn't actually have to take on c3. She can retreat her bishop somewhere like f8. And so that's important as the pawn d5 otherwise would have been hanging. So rook d8 protects. And what do you make of the black queen side? I know I often make fun of these light square bishops that are behind pawns. That's not really my point in this specific position, but it is part of it. What is black's agenda to develop that queen side?
Well, I mean, she has to get on it soon. I guess, let's see. Does the bishop want to? The bishop probably would prefer to be on b7, just because it seems like the d5 pawn will be traded off. So in the future, an idea like b6, bishop b7. The knight, if it goes to c6, is going to block any progress from the c pawn, but it's still very clumsy development here.
Yeah, I actually think that's always instructive, where if you put your knight on c6, you're kind of solid, but the problem is your pawn c7 behind the knight, so your knight can't really move. And that's why she plays c6, which is like, wait, wasn't Robert just talking about how the queenside pieces weren't developed? And the answer is yes, I was just talking about that. And yes, they're not developed. However, the position is extremely solid. When you look at a position, you want to find targets or weaknesses. Black currently does not have any, so white has more space. That can just be an aesthetic advantage if you don't show why that can turn into something more. And right now, with white not being castled, you'll spend a couple moves developing your bishop, castling, so black will have time to regroup.
I think Humpy's lights went out, but
Oh,
she's still there, glaring. And there's like a blue glare from the glasses. Oh, we lost. Oh, I hope she didn't disconnect
no,
from
she's back.
chess.com also.
She's back.
Okay. Okay, cool.
She's back.
Okay, sorry. Getting back to the game now.
I'm glad that you pointed out I wasn't looking at chat or the stream that I'm producing, so maybe that's a lesson learned on my end.
Well, I mean, that's actually a bit of a distraction to just have your lights completely die in the middle of such an important game against like the strongest female active chess player. But anyway, so E5, Hou Yifan finds a way to try to push open. Okay, and this is the plan she's going for with development, where she's going to try to recapture with the knight, and then Bishop G4 looks very juicy.
It does indeed, and trying to finish the development, but that's why white is not capturing on e5, waiting for the capture on d4. And you could even capture with the pawn on d4 there. I know a lot of players do not like isolated pawns, but if we just go back and move here, if you'd taken with a pawn on d4, the knight on d7 couldn't get out to the squares that it wants to, like e5. I think isolated pawns are not players' best friends usually.
Yeah, unless you're one of those people who likes the isolated like queen's pawn position, but no, I generally agree with you there. And Bishop G4, does the trade favor white, or can white try to consider something like F3 and E4 and gain a little bit of space with tempo? I mean, E4 eventually, not right away, because you lose the knight.
Right, I got you. F3 is one of those moves that you want to play, but then you often regret actually playing it. So instead, she keeps her pawn structure intact.
Yes, the TLDR to most of my games. Want to play, shouldn't have played.
I wasn't even trying to take a jab at you, Alexandra. I'm being supportive of you today. Yesterday, I was coming in hot. I was really getting on your case. Sorry about that. I'm not
No, it's all good. Wait, clock. 24 seconds to 114.
And black's position looks excellent, right? You have the double rooks on the open file, your queen on f6, your knight on e5, all look like they're working together extremely well. The problem tends to be in these positions, your position is better, but how are you going to turn it into something more? And that's why Yifan is spending her time very wisely right now, trying to figure out what move she should play that will increase her advantage going forward.
And she goes for b6, so she's trying to push c5. The problem is if she can't push c5, now the pawn on c6 cannot be protected by any other pawn. And if she, I mean, c5 here, she'll lose it, but if she plays even something like rook c8, let's say she gets c5, and she's going to have a pass pawn, but it's also going to be a bit of a target.
It's one of those pawns that's both an asset and a liability. It's an asset in the form of a pass pawn, as you mentioned. It's a liability in the sense that it's an isolated pawn and it can't be protected by another. So instead we are seeing some exchanges here, and to my eyes, this should be completely fine. However, my eyes don't deceive me when I look at the clock and see 13 seconds left for white. Which
True.
means that Humpy's going to win this game because she's
Well,
so good.
Hou Yifan has 30 seconds on the clock. I mean, she's getting in time pressure here as well, but she does have 3 passed pawns. I mean, unless there's some kind of checkmate coming, that seems pretty. Oh,
look at that! Wait, no, it doesn't make a draw. Queen is the f8 square.
Oh no, she missed Queen f8. Yikes!
Oh, what an idea! I was like about to praise her.
Yeah, that would have been so nice. That would have been so nice. That's perpetual technique.
Oh my! We'll definitely look at this one briefly after it concludes and the next game starts, because that is such a nice idea. And when you have just under 10 seconds on your clock, you go for ideas that don't always work out your way. Queen takes g2 check here should be enough to win this game.
Yeah, just simplify, and then you can't catch both those pass pawns. I'm curious why Humpy doesn't resign this right away.
She will.
Okay.
Or maybe she won't. Okay, now she will. I was surprised too. I was like, wait, there's no way she's going to continue playing this, will she?
No way.
And the next game, so I wonder what's happening.
Okay, so 3-3 is score so far.
Okay.
And there we go. All right.
I'm gonna go back to that position very briefly just to show that because I think it's very instructive. She went knight g5 after blundering a pawn because she was hoping that she could just make a draw on e8 and h5, and she overlooked the fact that the queen could retreat to f8 like it did in the game. So it was a very good effort in a position that was becoming tough. Unfortunately, it didn't work because of the retreat, and retreats are often the hardest moves to see, aren't they, Alexandra?
Well, that's what we keep saying in PogChamps. Whenever somebody moves a piece back, we praise them for how difficult it is. It's so interesting going from PogChamps commentary to commenting on the Women's Speed Chess Championship because obviously their play is out of this world, but there's sometimes similarities in the lessons.
Time trouble, us being nervous.
Exactly.
The players. There's a lot to learn from every single game of chess. I firmly believe that no matter the level of the players, and we're not here to be overly critical. We're here to look at the moves, try to, as objectively as possible, evaluate them, and talk about some of the plans. Because chess isn't a game of moves. It's a game of strategy. It's a game of plans. And so you're not just saying, hey, this move looks good. It's like, no, what is the purpose behind this move? And so, for instance, the last move played was bishop to f6. And many people say, that doesn't do anything. That bishop's staring into a brick wall of pawns. Well, maybe black wants to play knight e5 and take back with the bishop rather than the pawn on e5. That's one thing to consider. Maybe the e7 square is needed for the knight or the queen. So you should always be looking at the point of the move. Maybe if the knight goes to d4 for white, instead of allowing the bishop for white in the end of the trades to hit the g7 pawn, now I have a bishop on f6 that can trade off. So just try to think about everything going on. It's difficult in a game of blitz, and I'm going on a long-winded rant. So Alexandra, take the wheel. I don't want to talk anymore. I'm done.
Okay, well, it's interesting here because Humpy can decide which side to castle to. Does she want to castle king side or queen side? Okay, so she decides to go for the queen side castle, which makes sense since white already has a pawn on h4, and it's a little bit more intimidating to castle king side there. She also has the black pieces, so I guess she wouldn't be too upset with a draw here.
Yeah, I don't think so. And she's once again down about 30 seconds on the clock, so...
Yeah, no, not too surprised with that result. So knight d4 is threatening to take on c6, and then maybe the pawn on a7, because b6, which usually works to trap the bishop, would be a little bit dangerous after bishop a6 check.
Yeah, b6, you tend not to want to push pawns like that in front of your king when it leaves an open diagonal, right? So you're leaving the open fianchetto on that side of the board. So the capture has happened, and after bishop takes d4, now you're threatening take on f6 and shatter black's pawn structure. And as you point out, the a7 pawn. And now after queen takes d4, a7 and g7 both threatened here. And that's one of the major points in this opening, is that if you can successfully trade off on d4, exactly what just happened can be beneficial for white.
Okay, well, queen takes g7. What happens after that? I guess rook dg8 would come back, and then the g2 pawn is hanging, so that doesn't work necessarily.
Well, the rook on h8 has only one defender, so after queen g7, rook d to g8, I can slide my queen back to f6, for example, and the rook can't leave the back rank.
True. Whoa! Bishop takes a2, and then queen e6. Oh, that is so cute.
I wasn't even looking at that side of the board, and I didn't take my own advice, right? You think about what has each move done. Well, the queen leaving d4 means that after king takes a2 and then queen e6 check, there's no bishop c4. You can't block that check with the bishop, in which case you are going to lose your bishop in return.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so Hou Fan it still has a better pawn structure on the king side, because there's that h6 pawn and f7 pawn that are going to be quite weak in an endgame here. So that is some advantage, but Humpy has that open e-file. So who has is this a level game, or does one side have the advantage?
Oh, look at that move. Speaking of advantages and what to make of them, rook e1 says, take my 2 rooks for your queen. That's 10 points given up in rook value versus 9 points in queen value. But I guess the essential point is these split pawns over here on the king side will be difficult to keep defended. So it's going to be about the quality of the pawns in that position. So that is why Humpy did not take. Maybe she trusted Ifan a little bit too much, or she realized, hey, I can't allow this with my pawn structure fractured on the king side.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. And again, 37 seconds to minute 29. Safer to just retreat the queen, Rook e6. Okay, if the rook takes, does she want? She could take with the pawn and fix her pawn structure, so that would be quite nice. And if the rooks double up, I mean, she can just come rook e8.
Yeah, and Ifan's advantage, if there really is one, is slight, and it's in the form of having two pawn islands, pawns that are in adjacent files. That's one pawn island from f2 to h4, and the second is the b and c pawns. And black has three. You have a6 through d6, and then f7 is a second pawn island, h6 is a third. So having connected pawns is usually a good thing. And I also want to point out that let's say all the heavy pieces traded off right now. If we just disappeared them from the board, then white would try to push her pawns and make a queen on this flank over here on the h file.
Yeah, and again, that's something you very commonly see when you have a larger amount of pawns than your opponent on one side. You're trying to push forward somehow. But let's say she pushes g5, then I guess you could just trade off, and that's not a pass pawn. Or h5, that doesn't work either. So I guess I don't see the way forward for white. Is my point.
Yeah,
here.
I'm struggling to see that as well. I thought that, and she plays queen g4. She's trying to put. What if f5 though? f5, queen takes g5, queen g5, h5. The king runs very quickly towards this pawn.
Okay, so can you play queen h3? But then there's g4, and then Humpy also has a path. Oh, sorry, did I miss something?
No, you didn't miss anything. I think we're both in agreement that this is going wrong for Ifan, and Humpy should be happy here.
Okay, so... Oh, man. Queen f6. Yeah, just move the queen away, and now white has to deal with that attack. But how much better is this for black, though? I mean, we both have passed pawns here. Black has connected passed pawns and a better pawn structure, but is it enough to win?
Black's also up a pawn because you gave up your g pawn to spring for your h pawn.
True. But that's on the king side, and I don't see those pawns pushing forward for some time.
It has to be good for black, especially with the king coming right over to stop this passed pawn. Queen g2 is well timed, hitting this pawn on b7. Play queen. How can you attack the pawns? e4, trying to... Well, queen takes h5. That's stealing another pawn here. Black is up 2 pawns with a passed pawn on g4.
And this is usually winning when you have a queen and a pawn, because the queen is so good at helping that pawn. Like, for example, when you have a queen on f2, you defend your own pawn as well as the 2 squares it needs to promote. The only thing you have to be careful about here as black is to make sure you're not in any perpetual check. But I think with 2 queens, it'll be all right. It'll be all right. She'll find a way to block the checks.
Are you trying to tell me that 2 queens are better than 1?
It's crazy, isn't it? And I'm just showing that I know my queen math.
I didn't think you did based on some of your games, but here you do.
Thank you, thank you. So, wow, Humpy takes the lead again. Is this surprising to you?
I am actually quite surprised, more so about Ifan's decision making in that game. She'll be very disappointed in herself because if we bring that board up and go back to that moment where she went g5, because you were like, wait, but if you play g5 ever, you can't get that passed pawn. And she should have acknowledged that, and after h takes g5, taken back with her h pawn and just kept the material equality. She really isn't in much danger in the position would Ifan have been. Instead, she went queen g4, and after f5, a very nice move by Humpy saying, wait a sec, if you want to take on g5 now, you get your little passed pawn. But the black king is so quick there, and it's black with the passed pawn happening on the queen side, and that is why Ifan said, I can't do this anymore, and went down a pawn and lost the game. So she should have just taken back on g5 and minimized the risk.
Yeah, it seemed like she was forcing for a win here, and that made her misplay.
Yeah, I think the psychology, right? If you threw her into this position, she would probably have just taken back on g5. But however, playing with the history behind you of like thinking, oh, I've been better, I've been trying to make this work, that causes you some problems. So Alexandra, I'm going to let us go to a break, but before I do, I want to remind everybody of the standings really quickly, because if Hou Yifan does not win this match, she has no chance to catch up and tie Gunina and Ushanina because 12 points are available for the winner of the Grand Prix leg. So she needs to win both this match, if she can, and then the final. So let's go to our break, Alexandra, and when we return, we will have the bullet section of this Women's Speeches Championship match.
My favorite. Looking forward to it, Robert.
And we come back here ready for the bullet. It is a 1-point lead for Humpy Canero over Hou Yifan. And Alexandra, I saw a very good comment in the chat that I actually want to read out loud. It was by Peron Passato saying, I think Hou Yifan wins the bullet. Humpy is playing well in time pressure, but seems to get into it too quickly. I think the clock becomes an issue. What do you think about that statement?
I don't think we've talked about Humpy's clock enough during this commentary, Robert. I mean, it only comes up like every single game.
It does.
Yeah, that's the big question here. I mean, Humpy has been playing well in time pressure, but that's because she had time to at least understand the middle game position. Now she's not going to have that with bullet.
Right.
Actually, I'm going to check her bullet rating real quick on chess.com. Because I think that's a better indicator. So her bullet is a 24.53, and Hou Yifan, okay, the game started, is 24.88. So maybe Hou Yifan isn't that good at bullet either. I mean, compared to their usual rating.
Well, we'll bring Hou Yifan on screen here just to see her reactions. And okay, she has the black pieces here. Her bishops are developed, both sides castle. We have the same setup for both sides until that move c5 was played.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man, is it just me, or do you just get a shot of adrenaline whenever you see people playing bullet chess?
Oh, I'm pumped for bullet always because you're trying to come up with tactics really quickly, and we make plenty of mistakes. The players, much to their chagrin, they make mistakes as well. And ooh, look at this move. E takes d5, potentially leaving black with his hanging pawn structure if white takes on c5. If black takes back with a pawn, otherwise you get an isolated pawn.
Right, and so... Okay, so both of the bishops are kind of blocked up right now. I really like putting the knight on e4. F5 is a move that can come and support the knight, maybe even push f4 afterwards. Does white have to be worried about her kingside position at all, just because both bishops... I mean, the dark square bishop is looking towards it.
I heard you say worried about her clock, and she does need to be worried about that.
Oh,
and
I meant kingside position.
No, you said you started to say clock, and then you changed it. So... okay, this bishop on b2 looks scary at first glance. That's a very long open diagonal. Queen d2? The two pieces were hanging on the d file, but the knight on f3 was under attack. Okay. See, that's me just getting all antsy.
Whoa, I actually like what happened. She traded off her bishop. That knight on c4 is really strong. I am a little bit concerned, I guess, because h4 is coming to kick that knight out of g3, and then she's going to have to be careful about h2.
Yeah. So... Is queen c3? Oh my gosh, give it f6, I guess, because it's a mate back there.
Yeah, she's gonna have to take care of it. And now white needs to figure out another plan. Knight f1 is a nice defensive move. I like it, actually. I think it's a very solid bullet plan. She can also double her rooks on the d file. And when I say bullet plan, I say plans that you can come up with quickly that tend to not cause an inaccuracy.
Ooh, well, this position now, the black king does feel much safer. White has 12 seconds. We have seen Humpy play well in time triple game after game. As you said, we talked about it enough at this point? The answer is probably yes, but we have to keep mentioning it.
I will say that when she has 10 seconds, Hou Yifan usually has a minute and something.
That's true.
So it's actually an improvement.
But this position is improving for white very rapidly. We see the queenside pawn split for black, and it's a bishop against a knight, but the bishop comes to d5. Very important move. You can't let that knight roam around. And knight can go from color complex to color complex. That knight is on a dark square, cannot be attacked. The bishop can only stand in the light squares. I do not like white's pawn structure on the king side, and she just played f3, but now the h3 pawn. That's a potential target, and she plays king d6. Bishop e6! Just when you mention it, that's an h3 pawn that's going down here.
Oh no. Okay, and after... she didn't see it.
No, she was in check, so she decides to trade off. She played g5.
Oh. You're right. Sorry.
Wait, did she make a mistake here? a5, a4, f5, and she's just trying to win this endgame. But I'm not positive it's winning. King e2.
Oh, sorry. The point was she could have gotten out of check.
She could have moved her king for sure.
Yeah, she could have moved her king, and she was winning the pawn. Okay, that was the issue with her move. And now it's just, it's surprising for me that she missed that. Honestly.
Oh. Wait a second. Now it's a problem.
Oh.
It's winning. It's winning. Because if you go king e3, there's king e5, and then the white king has to choose a direction. Now king f4 and king g3. That was tricky.
Wow.
That was triangulation. She was moving her king, and now black wins the game. Oh my gosh, she lost opposition, and now
This was
Ifan's
very
the
close,
king.
though. This game gave me a little bit more hope in Humpy's time management, even though she got swindled at the end.
Well, it just felt like Humpy had a great position on the opening, and we've seen her in time trouble plenty of times. You keep mentioning it because it keeps happening, and I want to give Humpy a shout out of how well she has played in time trouble. That game, though, was because of her having less time on the clock. She misplayed some things, and then Ifan was able to scoop up the full point.
All right. Well, hey, we have a different opening with the black pieces, Robert. I was wondering if this was ever going to happen.
And, well, you're wondering, and your wonders have been answered. So, what do you think about this position?
It's pretty symmetrical. I like that the black knight's in the center, but now we have to be a little bit careful so that she wouldn't have to take back with a d pawn. Everything's been traded off. Bishop e6. Okay, so Humpy is playing really quickly, and she's playing for trades. That's an easy way to kind of get into a less complex position at the end there. Do you feel like Humpy thinks she's worse at bullet?
Well, based on what's been happening, I would imagine so. And it's weird because we've seen her do well when she's down to the waning seconds. Oh gosh, Queen A8 checkmate is a threat to Queen A8 mate.
Oh! No, I can't see that, Robert. Oh God. Ah.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to show it really quickly. After Queen to A7, she had to go Queen C6 to give D7 to her king. Instead, she took on B3 and mate in one happened. Let's go to the live board here. That was painful to watch, but not for Yifan, who moves into the lead in the match. You okay?
Okay, no. That was. I felt that one. It felt like it was happening to me. All right, let's go back to the position. D5, so she's closing it up. Makes a lot of sense with the bishop on B7, but as soon as you push the pawn to D5, C5 is now an opening for the knight to hop on. So she plays B4 in order to not allow the knight to C5, but now A5 is going to be a future plan for Hou Yifan, or I guess she could also go for C6 and try to take on D5.
I think you're trying to get at the bishop on b7 looks pretty bad. Ooh, knight g5 coming right into e6. f5 is the move you tend to want to play to open up the king side, but you're opening up the king side to your detriment here, as the knight just landed on e6, and black is all sorts of cramped. This bishop on b7, the knight's on d7, e7, not really doing the work that they want to. And here just bishop takes... I'm trying to think, do I play bishop f5 here? She does it, and queen g4, knight takes g7. There's some... Knight g7 almost works. Didn't quite work out. And now I think black somehow is holding on.
Okay, and f4, that is a very committal move. It's weakening a little bit on the white king side, but all of black's pieces are having a party in the left side corner there, so it actually doesn't matter. If e takes f4, what is the issue with just taking the pawn and trying to get your knight to e5, actually?
I guess this b3 knight comes into d4, and it feels like more of white's pieces are joining the attack. And Ifan is the one who is down quite a bit of time here. She plays c6. She's trying to collapse white's center, so if fe5, then knight takes e5, so she didn't have to spend a move taking on f4 herself.
Okay, that makes sense. F takes e5, and then you're threatening rook takes f5, and if rook takes f1, then you get the open file. Oh, I guess there was knight takes e5 intermediate move. Okay.
There was, but I still think that had a lot of promise for white. And look at this knight on d4. And after knight e5, there's knight takes f5, because there's just a bunch of tactics that... Oh, queen takes f4 now. Try to get that queen into f7. She takes on f4 with the knight. You have to play rook e5. Oh, the knight takes g6 is happening. This has to be crushing. Knight g6.
Now, yeah, gorgeous.
You don't have to ask me twice to sack my
No,
knight.
I think rook f7, is that a thing?
She's going to give a couple checks, and then she'll play rook f7.
She's going to get her time. Yeah.
And queen h6, queen g7, queen h7 all are a problem, because queen g8 would be the move to stop two of the mating attacks, and that's game. That's game. So, oh my gosh. We have, what, a minute and a half left approximately, and this is likely the final game.
5-5. It's coming down to bullet. That feels wrong, Robert. That feels wrong. That's like the coin toss of chess.
Hey, I'm here for it.
Oh man, that's so much pressure. I don't know. I love bullet and all, but
Is it too much pressure and you're nervous?
I'm nervous for the players, and it's the time control with the lowest amount of time. But honestly, it's been a really close match, so we would need some kind of tiebreaker anyway. And let's get back to the action.
Well,
I
I don't
guess.
think either player has had a lead of more than one game. So this has been a really close match.
You're right. You're right. No, Hou Yifan won 2 games in a row, but she was catching up, so there's always a 1 point difference.
And here we see that white has the bishop pair, black has the slightly better pawn structure in terms of not having double pawns. This knight came to g6, perhaps it's coming out to h4. And when I look at this position, my first instinct is that white's position has to be preferred here, and g3 is a great move, taking away any sort of forward knight jumps from black.
Were you quoting Hannah Montana?
I was earlier, yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Well, Miley Cyrus, not Hannah Montana, but whatever, same idea.
Sure. I just need to clarify. All right, so...
Wait, knight takes g3. Knight takes g3, because then bishop takes d3 and the bishop on f3 is hanging. I know I'm drawing arrows, it's complicated. But knight takes c3 or knight takes g3 both seem to steal a pawn? Question mark?
I see the idea you're talking about. Okay, too late anyway. So white has the bishop pair here, which is much more comfortable. The bishop's fianchettoed on g2. Although white has a worse pawn structure, those two c-pawns, I guess this position could go either way. Which one do you think is easier to play in time pressure?
The extra 13 seconds. Wait, that hangs the c3 pawn. Oh, it wasn't captured. The pawn was hanging on c3. Oh my gosh, it's so hard to play bullet. And bishop c6, I would try to just attack the rook on e8, take more space for my pieces here. Rook d5, also a good move. Oh my gosh, Alexandra, I'm nervous now.
I'm nervous for the players as well. Okay, but things are just being traded off. Humpy only down less than 10 seconds for once. Wow.
She is. Her position is worse. She has less space, but she moves knight to d7. She's trying to figure out where this knight goes. I don't have an answer for where it should go. Maybe she'll play e4, attacking the c3 pawn, trying to bring the knight into e5, but that's also really risky.
Okay, bishop d5 is a really nice square for the bishop, pinning the pawn on f7, and she's shuffling her moves a little bit. She goes for the trade, so she likes having the two bishops in the ending.
I'm thinking f4 here. It's a very risky move, and it's kind of playing for a win, but she's the one with all in the line here. She shouldn't risk it.
Right. c5. Oh, I like it because if you take, now you're really cementing in those double pawns. Oh my gosh. This is so close.
And it's looking better for black because you're up a pawn and you have these passed pawns here. Walking into a pin, the queen b1 check. You have queen b1. You need to make that move, king up to g2, and even e4. Nice move!
That's a gorgeous move. So if bishop takes c5, you take with check, and then I'm guessing you could continue bringing your bishop. Anyway, it didn't happen. Oh no, if bishop takes, then it looks like white's about to get mated after queen f1.
You have to play queen a8, queen a8 to hit the f3 pawn. Just in time.
But bishop g4 just defends.
Oh my gosh, there's nobody to get out of the mate. There's nobody to get out of the... Bishop c1.
Hope he's gonna upset Hou Yifan.
Oh, she has the queen d3. Only way to stop the... No, queen f1. There's no stopping mate.
Oh my god.
Oh my gosh. And Humpy, after all that, she wins. And she takes the match. And she eliminates Hou Yifan from the competition. Because I'm going to bring the leaderboard up. That was the case before this match started here. Oh my goodness. Look at the leaderboard. Hou Yifan had 10 points. With gaining points from this event, she needed all 12 to tie for first, and Humpy stopped her.
She was just dominating everybody else she played, Hou Yifan, I mean. Whereas Humpy was having somewhat closer matches, so it's even more surprising.
Oh my gosh, what a finish there. Just like, if we just go back, it looked like a bad position for black. I mean, relatively bad. It wasn't the worst position I've ever seen. But white had the bishop pair, had more space, was just moving around. And this move c5 by Humpy, who she had 7.7 seconds left when she made it. And she's attacking this pawn on b4, and Yifan definitely reacted badly with pawn take on c5.
Yeah, that felt really wrong. Versus, was b5 an option, or was there an issue with just trying to close it up?
I guess she thought that if she played b5, she wouldn't have winning chances, and clearly she was playing to win this game, not just to draw and head to tie breaks. b5 is certainly a possibility here, and this whole decision here to take and then go a5. You'd think, oh, my opponent won't take and give herself double pawns, but Humpy says, sure, why not? That's not a double pawn in my eyes. That's a pass pawn. And then rerouted the queen to b6. And this e4 shot. I mean, with 5 seconds remaining to play e4, understanding that white's king is in grave danger.
Yeah. I mean, Humpy deserves this win. Her amount of clutch endings was just extremely impressive. She's been able to play quite sharp, even with like less than 10 seconds on the clock. And she's come back from some very uncomfortable openings and positions.
She certainly has. In this position that I have after move 42, e takes f3, I think the only move available would have been queen to h5, of an extremely hard move to play because queen d8 check is so much more logical. But queen h5 hits the pawn on f3 and doesn't allow black to get this bishop g4 set up. And if your queen is stuck defending this pawn on f3, you're not going to be able to play queen f1 anytime soon. So queen h5 may have been able to save white this game. I don't have an engine in front of me, but the point is that I'm attacking f3. I'm going to try to play bishop d4 myself, put pressure on your g7 pawn. And I'm just hoping that this allows white to survive. I'm not positive. Instead, queen d8 check, that didn't help at all because after the king went to h7, queen a8, bishop to g4, in came queen f1, in came queen g2 with checkmate.
And, okay, so at that point, Hou Yifan had 10 seconds on her clock. I mean, I can see why it was hard to see, but if somebody's going to see, it's going to be Hou Yifan. But with that being said, we have the second match starting.
We are about to have the second match that will be between Sara and Kosteniuk, so we are excited for that one. It's going to be, well, I don't know how it can be more exciting than the match we just saw. That came down to the wire. I am pretty pumped, though.
Okay, so predictions for this match. We talked a little bit about it yesterday, but do you want to maybe repeat it for people who didn't see?
Well, Kosteniuk is amazing, and we had her on for the interview afterwards, and she was saying, I'm a fatalist. You know, I can control my destiny, but it's hard to make predictions because even though I'm playing amazingly strong player after amazing strong player, we all make mistakes. Whoa! Sara with the early f5. What do you make of that decision, Alexandra?
I liked it. It was really aggressive. I mean, sorry, it is really aggressive. But it's more of a blitz opening than a classical opening. So we'll see if it pays off.
Indeed. And I'm just wondering here, what's going on? Because there's a bishop on d3. Black hasn't castled yet. What do you make of? I mean, I don't know what to make of this, really.
Well, I guess you could just move your bishop back and then castle. It's not like white has some kind of killer attack that's going to keep Sara from castling, right?
Right. That's true. And
so for that reason, I'm not too concerned. I actually wonder, where's Kosteniuk going to develop her bishop from c1?
That's a great question, but that would require the bishop to stay on d3, where it looks very strong. But after rook e3, it's clear that Sara's hesitant to play the move e4, whether that's because of knight to d4, applying pressure on the pinned knight, or knight to e1, hitting this bishop on d3, and that bishop has nowhere to go. So I think that's really Sara's first obstacle, and then now that the bishop's gone, can't white just play d4?
Yeah, d4 looks really strong right now. I think black almost has to castle away so that the knight on c6 isn't pinned anymore, and that way, although I guess you can still take on e5 and trade the knight. Is that winning a pawn? d4 and then castle for black?
So, yeah, it looks like it's getting close. So if black plays e4 here, I'm even looking at d5 for white. It's getting complex with the king still being in the center.
Yeah, it's tough to figure out the right moves here. So she plays e4 probably for that reason. And now d5 is going to be met by b5, and it's the only way to defend against the knight that is pinned is to just attack the bishop.
True, and I'm just editing, trying to get the players on camera behind the scenes, so bear with me for a second. d5 was played, that's what I had mentioned. And what do you do here? Do you play b5, but then is there knight takes b5? Like, there's so many sacrificial opportunities.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and these are the most common ways to defend against a pin when your pin knight is attacked. So it's good that we're seeing that, but how is black gonna castle her king now? That bishop is super annoying. You can push d5, but okay, I don't know. I thought you couldn't push it for a second. I thought it was lost, but it is weak, even if it's not lost. That pawn is going to be a target, and it cannot be defended by the pawn on c7. But there's also a pawn on f3. I mean, this position is just crazy.
It certainly is, because now black is giving herself the right to castle, and white says, hey, take my pawn on g2. That pawn will actually shield my king. What black really wants is somehow to attack the g2 pawn with like her queen, where the queen's sitting on d8. That's not a possibility. In comes this knight to d4, which attacks the bishop on f5, tries to get into the e6 square. It feels like, to my eyes, that white should be very happy about this position, because her king does feel a bit safer, and black's position feels looser.
True. So speaking of black's loose position, is there anything black can try to do? This is a little bit weird, but maybe just castle out of it right now and don't even worry about the pawns, because I think king safety is more important.
I agree with that. I am worried about the knight coming to d4, though. Like, no matter what, I'm just trying to take the light squares. I'm going to keep my bishop on b3, and I'm going to try to go knight e6 and force you to give up your bishop pair, and then say the light squares will be vulnerable pretty much permanently.
And how bad would it be for black to give up the bishop pair? Say something like bishop takes c2.
Not ideal. Just, especially without this f. Well, you have an f pawn, but without a pawn on f7, she did just take on c2. Then the e6 square, the f5 square. It feels like white can just poke and prod and make progress on these compromised light squares.
Okay, well, she did trade off the bishop pair, and now she's taking on g2. Maybe she'll get some compensation. Now she can pseudo castle something like king f7 and bring the rook to e8. That gets out of the pin, and it brings another piece.
I mean, king on f7. How do you feel about that king, though? I'm sure you look at it and you're like, that king's probably not exactly where it wants to be.
But there's no other option. So I feel like the king is doing the only thing that can be done here.
That's true. And actually, playing a4 on the queen side and then bishop c5 was a really nice move by Sarah, because she's attacking this rook, and now that the rook's off the e-file, here comes rook to e8. And this is suddenly looking not quite as bad as I thought it was going to be for Sarah.
Yeah, she somehow Houdini'd it. She was in a tight trap and made quite a few improvements here. Of course, I still prefer white's position just because white's king safety is still a little bit better. Sure, Sarah's up a pawn, but the g2 pawn is going to fall at some point. The pawn on d5 is weak. There's a semi-open file on the f file. There's a bishop versus a knight. The pawn on e3, though, is also weak. So the fun thing about this position is that it's very imbalanced. There's a lot going on for both sides.
Yes, that is certainly the case. And she takes on g2. Now bishop takes h7 is a threat that you should look out for, because the knight on f6 is pinned, and the pawn on h7 is so vital as the g6 square becomes loose without it. So you cannot just give up that pawn. And Sarah's probably thinking, do I play king to g8, or do I mean, I guess I don't see any other move to protect that pawn besides king to g8.
Yeah.
Ooh,
or she just takes, and now...
Take this pawn for sure. That's a really important pawn. Oh, I don't think that either one... Maybe she did see it, but she's waiting for a sacrifice on g6. Is Kosteniuk, but I would have stolen h7. I'm trying to like make all this attack. Like e4 is a possibility.
Yeah, you're finding some really creative stuff here. Whereas Sarah, I feel like, is just playing this really solidly. She can't play king g7, which would be nice to get out of the pin of the rook, because then there's h5 coming. So she plays king e7. She goes the other way, trying to get into safety.
Yes, she went to e7, which actually is really smart, avoiding any sacrifices on g6. And now black actually seems to have everything under control. The knight on f6 for now is defended, although I'm still looking at rook takes f6 ideas. The e6 rook hits e3 along with the queen on b6. So black's pieces are multitasking, and I don't see how white crashes through just yet.
True. I mean, you cannot attack that knight one more time. You can't with your e-pawn. There's no way it's going to advance to e5. There's just protected on its path. The light squared bishop can't attack. So what you try to do instead is attack pieces that the knight is defending. But now, are we getting music, Robert?
What? Music? What music?
Oh no. Sorry, I read chat wrong. There was in the corner of my eyes flashing bright colors from the little dancing Kirby.
Oh. Well, now you confused me. I was like, what music? I wish,
Yeah,
but I'm,
no,
I'm
you're
on the
right. I'm
no
sorry.
music grind right now. And I want to play e4 for white, but I can't because the pawn is pinned. But e4, the point, I just want to blow the whole thing open. Let me open up the king on e7. She played king h1, and is e4 about to happen?
Okay, e4, and if you take, you're hanging the knight, so that doesn't work.
Right, if you take with a rook, you're hanging the knight. And if you take with the pawn, then my bishop is open. I may not capture your rook just yet, but I will have the potential to do so. She instead reroutes her bishop to...
Maybe e4, queen e5? Just blocking with your queen and trying to trade off the piece. Although you can't take on g5, because then you're actually bringing in a pawn.
Yeah, so I really want to play e4. She instead is switching over to the queen side, and it's only one extra pawn for black, but she's down a minute on the clock, and her king is open in the center. So I would prefer to have white's position here. What about you? Would you like the extra material? I know sometimes you're a pawn grabber, or would you prefer to have the potential of the attack and the extra time?
I would get the attack and the extra time. I think that's much more valuable here.
Yeah, and e4 was played, so I'm happy to see that move. And I don't know if Sarah's happy because queen c5 check threatens rook a7. That's why she went rook a1, is now rook a7 would win this queen. Wait, rook a7!
Rook a7, queen takes, rook e7, and then taking the rook maybe was complicated.
Oh, it wasn't that complicated.
That's fair.
Oh,
and now Sarah's king is kind of okay.
The king made its way back to J. Bishop
Wait,
beat...
queen h6 and threatening mate?
That's what I'm looking at too, but there's only mate on g7. And I say only as if that's not a big deal.
Oh, because now it's made on 2 squares.
Bishop takes queen d1 check. Queen d1. Play queen d1. Only move. And queen d1, the king can't go to h2 because knight g4 check. The king goes to g2. And then after queen g4, then you have king h2. Oh my gosh, you escape. And it's winning for white.
Oh, no, white escapes here. Yeah. Sorry, for a second I thought you were saying black. Okay, yeah, white is definitely the one escaping here.
Oh my gosh, that was ridiculous sequence. And Kostanek shook her head like, what was that?
Oh, man.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to bring that back up really quickly because white was going... Firstly, white missed rook a7 to pin the queen on the 7th rank, and that would have probably won the game on the spot for Kostanek. Instead, she went for an attack. She was really playing on both sides of the board, and after rook g8 to stop this checkmate on g7, there probably wasn't really a better option because rook e7 would have cut the queen's defense of the f8 rook, and everything is hanging. And then, importantly, king on h2, there's no knight takes queen on g4, and thus there's no check, and thus checkmate happens for white. So let's go to the new game. Sorry to get into...
It's okay. I've been on the
mode.
new game as well and looking at your commentary there. So we got a queen's Indian here. There's a bishop on e4. Usually you expect to see a knight on e4, but that's because he recaptured. And white didn't take back on e4, which could have created doubled pawns for black, but then she would have been able to play with f5 at some point, which is always an annoying structure to play against, even if it's not the most sound. And she goes for that regardless. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's good, though, to question, like, do I take on... do I take this bishop on e4? Do I leave it? And after f5, it seems pretty clear she will leave it. And f5 is one of those committal moves, Alexandra, that you sometimes want to take back because the e5 square is now under white's control, and black can't kick a knight out of there with a pawn.
Right. So the way Box Blocks would say is bring the knight into the O whenever he would see these kinds of positions, referring to like the f5, e6, d5, d4, e3 pawn.
To bring the knight into the O?
Yeah, the knight into the O. It was like a strategy, and that was the way he learned it.
Interesting. I don't know if the knight can get into the O here, but...
So the problem with knight e5 would be that also weakens white's pawn structure here, right?
Yeah, in the case of a pawn trade. And already there's a lot of tension on b4, on d4, on c4, so you have to figure out all of these potential exchanges.
Okay, so c takes d4, or b takes c5, or bishop takes e4, or white can just try to keep the tension. How do you decide which pawn trade to go for? And it's so weird when there's so many trades and you're like, no, I'm just gonna keep it closed here.
Yeah, she said, I don't want to trade. I'm going to play b5. And her idea is, if you look at the queen side, a3, b5, that's a 2-on-1 pawn majority on the first two files. So, especially in an endgame, if I can go a4, keep my pawn protected there, I'll have the potential of an outside pass pawn. And actually, right away, d5 is hanging, and now d7 is hanging. So you take on d7, and after e takes f3, queen d5 check, and take on f3. So that's a check to the king. Sarah playing well here.
Yeah. And Sarah is now going to double up her rooks on the c file. The pawn on the c4 is now weak. She can add in her queen to the mix too if she feels like it, after, of course, protecting the pawn on b5. So her plan to win here, because if she puts queen on f4 and black doubles up, she can't win that pawn.
Right, because black has everything defense. So the extra pawn is on e3. It's like in the center of the board, and it's not as valuable as maybe an outside pawn to use as distraction. So queen c7 played by Castaño, saying your king no longer has the h2 square, so maybe you can blunder a back rank checkmate or something. I'm trying to figure out how you play for a win here from White's point of view. I think you have to slow play it. And, well,
so e4, that's a nice soft trade. And then she can bring her rook actually to the king side. Something like rook g3. Because that pawn isn't just trading, it's opening up the path to try and gang up on the attack, right?
That's a great point. I wasn't even really thinking about that, but you see that the rook can swing over from the queen side over to the king side, and that can be a problem because White has an extra pawn on the king side, and Black's king can get into some difficult waters if that rook is able to help in the attack. So we saw a trade on e4. The e6 square is one I'm looking at as well for the check here. The c4 pawn is under attack, and you pointed this out a while ago, Alexandra. Black put all of her pieces protecting the c4 pawn, so you can't capture.
Yeah, this is because this is the best defensive method. But now what White could do is bring one of her rooks, her c1 rook, so that the c3 stays blocking to the open file, because Black can never challenge it, because then there would be a trade and the c4 pawn would hang.
Right, and h6, a calm move played. And did you send that ambulance my way?
Yeah, I think it finally made its way over to you.
This feels like you're doing here. And I'm fine, everybody. Thanks for asking. And the queen on e4 nicely centralized, the rook on c3. But your idea with rook to g3, I really like it, trying to bring the rook to the king side. I'm worried, though, that allows Black to just continue pushing the pawn.
Right, because after rook g3, how do you continue with that attack? I mean, maybe something like queen e3.
It just feels like you're going for one-move threats. And so she starts with the queen to g4. I don't know how you make progress here, really. I think that Black can just sort of shuffle.
Okay, so let's say White has a few moves in a row.
Okay, what would those be?
Like rook e1, rook e6.
I like that.
And then you're putting pressure on h6. You have rook g6. That doesn't allow the pawn to push until you play rook g3. Tripling up on the g file.
That's really, really smart play there, is bringing in this rook that's not blockading the pawn into the action, get some potential threats there. I think rook e1 is a nice move because you can attack this pawn from c4 on c1, or you can attack it from e4, for instance. And either way, Black will be tied down to the defense of it.
Okay, so h5.
Ooh.
That seems a little concerning to me.
I guess she's saying I'm not going to move my rook off of c5, so even though I'm putting my pawn from a protected square by another pawn to a potentially weak square, the rook is just staying here, staying put to keep it defended.
Yeah, and she has to do that here. 223 to 220. A little bit better time management in this game than the previous. Whoa, isn't c4 hanging? The rook just left the defense. What's going on here?
Take that thing for sure. I was looking, is there some kind of tactic? None that I see. Take that pawn with check, and you go up a second pawn, and that end.
Okay, that's interesting.
Oh, I think I see what she was trying to do. I don't know if it worked. I'm going to go back real quick. If queen c4, queen takes c4, rook takes c4, there was rook e1 check. And the point is, I'm giving up my rook that looks like for free. But after rook takes e1, there was rook takes c4, hitting the pawn on h4 and the pawn on a4. So she was probably trying to enter an endgame where she would be down one pawn, and a lot of times these rook endgames down just a pawn have drawish tendencies, but I don't believe it. I think a5 here would have been good for white. So actually that does seem like a missed chance for Sara. She played queen g6 instead, and now do not take on c4 because rook e1 is checkmate.
Okay, very, very nicely spotted there. So can she just push g3 then so that her king can actually come up to h2 or g2?
And after g3, I'm then worried about the long diagonal with this queen getting to b7 at some point.
Oh, well, it's never going to be perfect. I mean, she has to do something, but you're right. You're right. There is a long diagonal now.
Although you're right, because she has to do something, and the queen on g6 can just slide over to c6 and say, you give me a check, I offer a queen trade.
True, true. And then she would win the c4 pawn after, so it would be a better endgame for white.
There's perhaps no way to protect the c4 pawn now. I'm attacking it twice. Black cannot take on c1 because I throw in queen takes e8 with check, and then take back this rook on c1, and I go up a rook. So how do you actually plan on defending this pawn?
Okay, that's a tough question, Robert. Let's see. I don't know. I don't think you can.
Okay, so rook e6 play. The queen's under attack. Queen takes h5. So let me steal that h. You had your reservations about when Kostenjuk played h5. I think that we understand exactly why you didn't like it, and it just was captured.
Yeah, it felt very wrong. But okay, at least Black can make some progress. Rook takes c1, rook takes c3, just try to get the pawn a little bit more advanced. Although, actually, you can't play c3, because then if you attack the pawn, I guess the only way white could attack the pawn is with queen f3, and then you can push it forward to c2. But basically, it's really hard for the black rook to keep defending that pawn if she pushes it.
Completely agree. Now, I'll show that real quick, that the queen could attack it. You push, and I go queen b3, for instance, hitting c2, pinning the rook, and that would have been an issue. So instead, we saw rook e5, and then blockading once again. White's pieces are a little bit tied down, but the king on g8 is so weak that I think rook e3 should just allow white to attack more quickly than that pawn can push.
So queen b2 isn't going to work because there's rook e8. So that's why, okay, queen b8. And rook c3 I really like, just trying to keep the passed pawn blocked and threatening something like queen e4 in the future. Is that no, rook e1, rook e7. Okay, that's much better.
Yeah, going for the checkmate. Now you can. Okay, so trading queens may not work the way you'd like. So queen e3 here threatens rook to e8 and the rook on c5. I feel like there has to be just a pretty quick attack that should be lights out, and that's what Sara is ultimately aiming for. She's also up 30 seconds almost on the clock.
Cool. And I'm also looking at trades, just because usually when you're up 2 pawns, if you can simplify, then you're going to have a better position. But I am worried about the passed c pawn.
Although queen f8, she doesn't. Rook takes a7, and after c3, she'll go b6. So you were right to calculate the trade, and here comes b8 equals queen with check after black queens, and in fact, we just saw resignation.
Okay, wow, it's 1-1. Starting off close.
It is. And I think we will have another close match. I believe that Kostenjuk has to be the favorite. She's much higher rated. You look at the ratings here. And Sara has made her way to now her 3rd straight semifinal. So she's won her first 2 matches in every single WSCC Grand Prix leg thus far.
And how many have we had so far?
This is our 4th, and the players play 3 out of 4. So this is her 3rd and final semifinal. And she has lost both semifinals she's played into this point. And she then lost a consolation match to Kostenjuk in the previous leg as well. So Kostenjuk, she's the higher-rated player. She beat Sara head-to-head in a previous match. I have to give the nod to her as being the favorite, but I'm not putting that as like a 90% favorite. No way. I think that Sara is extremely capable. I just, if I'm forced to make a prognostication, it has to be in Kostenjuk's favor.
I think that's fair. We talked about how she did better than Sara last time, how she's a little higher rated, a little more experienced. That doesn't mean Sara can't upset her, but objective opinion as usual, Robert.
I do what I can.
So, speaking of, what do you think of these kinds of positions in a Ruy Lopez where Black decides to fianchetto her bishop?
I think that these positions generally are quite solid for black, but you lack a bit of space. So what I mean by solid is there are no pawn weaknesses that white can immediately take advantage of. And on the other side, if you put your bishop on g7, you're staring into your own pawn. So it's not like your bishop's on a happy diagonal. And wait a second. Oh, it's black's move. I was like, wait, isn't the knight f6 hanging? White had just went queen f3, and so the knight was hanging. Now bishop g7. So this is exactly what I mean. What is this bishop on g7 really doing? It's allowing black to castle, but it's not threatening anything. It's just stuck behind its own pieces.
True, but that's already enough to make me a little bit uncomfortable. The pawn on h4 is a little concerning to me for white, though, because it seems like she has to castle at some point. She can't castle queenside yet. Obviously, there's a queen on d7 intercepting. Castling g1, then I don't see her pushing h5 in the future. So she's going to have to go for it and keep her king in the center, or just realize that it's going to be a weakness later on.
Well, maybe she'll play knight to d2 and try to castle queenside. I agree that I'm not really looking to castle queenside myself. But the initial question for Sarah is one that she's struggling to answer: is what she can do with this knight on f6. She eventually played queen to c6, which protected the knight and put pressure on e4. And knight d2 says, okay, I'll protect e4 and now open up my rook on a1.
True. Okay, so h4, Sarah also blocking up the position there. And now queenside castle, not a bad option for white.
And do you think that... I think that black is going to castle the same way that white was. So if white had castled queenside, I get the feeling that black also would have castled queenside. And now that white castled kingside, black said, okay, I'll follow your lead.
Fair enough. And now in terms of plans, she's just bringing her rook to the open file. White could do the same thing with something like rook a d1, but then the question is, how does white continue the attack? I mean, that knight on d2, I guess it'd be better on d5, but you don't want to trade it. Is the plan something like bishop takes f6, get the knight on d5, something white could try to go for?
Yeah, that would be the dream. If you could reroute this knight, get it to a square like d5, but the problem is it takes quite a bit of effort, and the e4 pawn is under attack. And actually, knight takes e4 right now should work for black. Knight takes e4 wins a pawn, because if knight takes, rook takes d1, I distract your rook from e1 at the end of this. The rook is overloaded, and I'm able to take back on e4.
And Sarah has enough time to see this here. But would Kostanik have really slipped that?
Yes.
Okay, because the idea was, I guess, to just push the f pawn. Oh no! And bishop e7!
Oh my gosh, so it's like a double blunder. It went from a good position to walking into a tactic. Oh, that's so sad when that happens.
Yeah, honestly, that's so upsetting. For Sarah, of course, not the unbiased commentators.
No, we're obviously not rooting for players. We're just talking. We know what it's like to be in that situation. I certainly do, where I'm looking at my position like, okay, I should be seizing the advantage here. Where is it? Then I'm like, oh no, I'm worried about something. I make a retreating move, and that's the move that cost me. It's funny because people would think of knight h7 as like a safe move, but sometimes the safe-looking moves are actually the least safe because you're either not going for an initiative yourself, or in this case, walking into a tactic that your opponent has waiting for you.
True. I'm just trying to see if there's anything she could try to do to save it. I mean, keeping the position closed is always good when you're down in exchange, but that pawn on d6 is so uncomfortable that those rooks are just going to get open right away.
Trying to steal these pawns here. I think it's the best that Sarah can do under the circumstances. Like queen takes b2. Keep taking. Just go for it. Now black has one pawn for her trouble, so it's a pawn and a bishop for a rook. And this pawn is not just any pawn, it's an A pawn. So if queens get traded, that probably won't be good for black because you need your queen as like your aggressive piece. But I'm looking at that outside, hoping that I can start running that pawn down the board.
Okay, so any direct threats from white now? Rook b1, rook takes b7, and grab another pawn?
Yeah, that looks pretty good.
Although I guess you could play rook b1, queen a3, attack the knight, but then you can still take with your knight, so there's not a really good option here.
And you could take on b7 with a knight, as you're saying. I would also consider knight to d7. And the point is that I'm just trading off this knight on f6, liquidating into a position that should be really good for me. But she's saying pawn is a pawn. Let me just steal that. And I can play rook to d8 next to trade off the rooks.
True. So after knight g4, is there any threat with playing rook d8?
Oh, I'm feeling not great about this move f3. It just makes this king on g1 feel a little bit less safe, especially against a dark square bishop.
All right, Ben Feingold, never push f3 or f6, right?
I wouldn't say never do it. I was just saying in this particular position. However, Alexandra says, let me steal the pawn, and, well, let me steal the full point.
And there we go. She gets the win. And is this going to be their last game today? I think so.
Yeah, there's a minute.
I mean, in the 5-minute section. Sorry.
There's a minute and 15 seconds remaining in this time segment, so it almost certainly will be the last game, unless we see some kind of crazy blunder or a draw offer, which won't happen.
Right. Okay, so queen takes d2, so that she could put the knight on c3. Otherwise, it looks really awkward. Although the square on e4, if knight e4, I guess you just play queen c2, which is another good square for the queen. But then what if queen bishop knight b4 also? Sorry, I keep saying different pieces.
I was like, are you telling me queen b4, bishop? I mean, knight b4, bishop b4. What's going on here? So
no, knight b4 after queen c2.
Well, the knight e4. Oh, and you have f5. You are sneaky. I was like, wait.
I didn't see that.
Yes, you did. I don't believe you. Knight b4, queen takes e4, pawn f5. The point is that there's some kind of nice c2 check at the end. I feel like that knight may get trapped on a1, but I was queen b4 check was played. I actually think I've had a game in this position before, a very long time ago.
Because knight c3, you just take and you're going to get a bad pawn structure. Knight d2
you lose
actually
a pawn.
Is an option. You lose a pawn.
Because knight takes
you
d2.
take and you take on c4. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you have to play king to f1?
You can play knight c3 and accept that worst pawn structure. I actually had a game in 2011 against Larry Christensen in this position. So now we're taking me back in time.
Absolutely.
Did I just go old man on everybody here?
You always do, Robert. We're used to it.
And in that game, I took on c3, and Larry took with the pawn, and then I took his pawn on c4, and I was able to get away with it. But there is compensation for white, despite the fact that black is up a pawn, because white castles, gets pretty quick play, and has more space in the center. Here, we see even material, but these double pawns are, I think, ones that you're not particularly thrilled about.
Yeah, but how hard is it to play with them in the endgame? I mean, a little harder than the opening. But you just have to be protecting that c-pawn. It's kind of like the base pawn in a chain, in that all of the pawns that are protected are connected to that c-pawn. So that's why d6 is played, actually, because the idea could be to play knight a5, but you don't want to allow c5 so easily and have the pawns just defend each other all the time.
Yeah, c5 would have been a move that white wanted to play, as you were saying, to keep the pawns defended and stop black from pushing her own pawn so easily. Now, this pawn doesn't want to go to c5 so badly. However, this rook on b1 is threatening. Bishop takes c6. The knight just jumped out the way. What now? You can't go knight b3 like I want to, because the pawn c4 is hanging. And black's idea is to go b6 next move.
Yeah, to overprotect the c5 square.
I just like black's position, to be honest with you.
That's fair. That's fair. I like black's position as well. And Kosenyuk is just a queen at these Indian style positions. She's played them in a lot of the matches that I've commentated against her. I feel like she just understands them so well.
So you said she was a queen. Was that maybe because her username is Chess Queen?
Chess Queen, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That took me a while to process. I wasn't really sure that's what you were doing because it wasn't a glaringly obvious joke to make. But just
it's okay, Robert. You'll catch on to humor soon.
Oh, I just wasn't that funny.
Well, we'll just no, I'm kidding.
I had to throw in, a little bit of banter because I've been very nice to you today, and I don't regret it at all. But I just, you know me.
It's all relative, Robert. Nice is relative.
Oh, okay. Wow.
No, I'm kidding. I mean, I guess I make some mom jokes as well, so that's why it's fun to commentate with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That hurt.
Okay,
Nice is relative. I thought. Anyway, the chess. So the king is on e7, which is not a problem in the position that we have without the queens on the board. You're not getting attacked. So the king sits here happily, as in the end game, your king can be used as a weapon. So having the king close to the center is a good thing.
Right. And that way, Kosteniuk will be able to develop her rook to the d8 file pretty quickly. The knight on a5 looks quite awkward, actually. But it does hold that c4 square a little bit. But why does she want to trade off the knight if it's on the rim? To fix her pawn structure, maybe?
She wants to fix the pawn structure, and she wants to get now this knight to d4 into c6. So that's why Kosteniuk ended up trading, and now her pawn structure is fixed. Before they're isolated pawns on the queen side, now the pawns are connected. I think black is doing absolutely fine here. Bishop b7, trading off that previously undeveloped bishop. It feels like there's no real risk in the position for black. And actually, after she plays a5, what can she complain about?
b4, a takes, c takes, rook a7. Looks quite menacing here. So yeah, she had to trade off here. And now, if can we say this game is a draw, or is it still level?
It's not a draw because black has the potential of an outside pass pawn and has the more active king. So when I look at this position, I'm thinking, what pieces do I want to see traded? And the answer is, if I'm black, I would like a pair of rooks off the board. If I'm white, I like having both rooks because now I can team up on this pawn on a5, and then I force black, if she wants to keep her outside pass pawn, into a passive defense. And rook to b5 is a threat, and if I have to go rook a8, I'm not happy about it.
True. Okay, so rook c5 with that outside passer, but I guess the problem I have is even if you have that passed a pawn, you can leave that rook on a4 forever, the rook on c1 and a king on d3, maybe push the pawn to h4, and almost all of your pawns are always going to be protected.
Forever is a really long time, I must admit, and I'm thinking about playing king to c6 and trying to play rook to b7, for example. And saying, like, take me here, I'll put my king back on b6, then my rook will be free. It just feels like with the outside pass pawn, especially if both pairs of rooks get traded, then black is winning.
So white has to be careful to not trade rooks. Oh, both pairs of rooks. Yeah. But one pair of would one pair of rooks make any difference?
Yeah, I think it just makes black's life a little easier, though white should still be able to hold with proper play. It also gets me closer to what my ultimate goal is trading off all the rooks.
Okay, rook g8. So she's going for the pawn grab. But g6, and then if f7 is ever attacked, she can move her king to defend. If h7 is under attack, she'd always move it to h5. The point being that these pawns are all going to support each other as long as the base pawn is protected.
And she went rook g5. She didn't want to allow after g6 rook to g7, hitting both at the same time. But this allowed white to just march her pawn up the board here. And let me ask you, Alexandra, is it good for white the pawns on h5, or is that one of those pawns that you may regret pushing that far?
I would probably regret pushing it that far just because it's going to be more difficult to take care of. But black can't take it right away because g7 is hanging. So positionally, I regret it, but tactically, it's okay for now. But let's see what happens in time pressure.
She went king to e3. I can't even play f4. I would like to play f4, but the pawn g3 is hanging. So h6. And that's a really good move because let's say you do take on h5 and white takes on g7. Now I don't also have to worry about my h7 pawn as it's no longer on an attack square. So h6 feels good. And where's Sarah going to go now? King up. Okay. And I'm just like annoyed that black, the king and the rook are not on the queen side over there, are not doing what they need to do. So king c6 is what I can. She does play it. Okay.
What about e4 and try to get a little bit more space here?
Probably.
It sounds really bold and it's probably a bad idea, but I like the idea of trying to take away some of the squares from the rook on the 5th rank.
No, it was a reasonable move. And she went rook c8 because now after rook c7, she'll trade and play c5 and cut this rook off from the defense of the a5 pawn. That would be a very bad trade for black. So now it's funny. I said how earlier white wanted to avoid a trade of rooks. Wait. Take and play c5. Uh-oh. And a5's falling.
But, yeah. But then the h5 is also falling, and maybe f2 if you're not careful enough. And then the rook can come from behind. How do you... Can you please teach me your GM ways of understanding these rook and pawn endgames and when they're drawn, when they're not? Because they're so freaking confusing.
So the reason why I like this position for white now is because I'm taking the a5 pawn, and now it's white. It's Sarah who's left with the outside pass pawn. It's not as far outside as a flank pawn, rook pawn. But now I have a pawn that will keep black's king tied down. And if I take on a5, my threat is rook a7 after that with check, hitting black's pawns on the other side of the board. So I'm hoping to tie the rook and the king towards the c pawn and then go after the pawns on the other side of the board. That's what I mean by a decoy.
Got it. But how can you... Like, would you say this is still a draw with correct play?
It feels like it should be. It's just from rook b6 check. And then maybe rook a6, okay? I don't know how to make progress, though. That's the issue. And actually, after king to b7, there may be king to b5. You have to consider that move, because I just want to show really quickly. Like, if king b7, king b5, rook takes c5 looks like it would be good for black, trading into a pawn-up endgame, but this white king would be able to run pretty quickly over to the king side. So it's all these things you have to figure out move by move. There's no, like, clear... You have to calculate it. I can't just say, like, oh, it's probably this or probably that. No, it's not probably anything. It either is or it isn't.
Even when you're looking at rook and pawn endgames, like, you basically, you understand the concepts, but you still have to calculate, and it could be unclear even for you in some of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And look at this king. I'm threatening c7 check. So you probably throw a check, and now my king goes to c5, and I'm going king d6. Take on h4. I want to go king d6. There it is. c7 check is the threat, and otherwise my king comes in e7. This is exactly what I meant by a decoy in this queenside pass pawn. I'm keeping you alert for that pawn's progress, and c7 check, that wins. It wins in the spot. Rook a7 check.
Oh no! But what if she would have kept up with the checks and then just take the pawn and lose the pawn on f7? Wow. Okay, so that's incredible. Also, I love the comment. I love how she talks to Robert as if he has some special power. That's because you do, Robert. That's because you do.
My only quote-unquote power or special power is that whenever I see a position, I'm never just like coming to a conclusion without continuing to ask questions. I think that's very important. You should always be skeptical. You should always ask questions, try to think what is possible that I may be missing, and then you'll be more likely to come up with those solutions. And now white is up a queen for a rook, and there are still pawns on the board, which makes her life even easier.
And there we go. We got that resignation. 2-2. What a close match.
Couldn't be any closer than a tie, that's for sure. And I do want to go back to that moment just once more because it's extremely instructive, where Sarah pushed her pawn, and you said, why couldn't the rook check on d3? And the rook should have checked on d3, absolutely. And she probably didn't check on d3 on move 51 for black because king to e7, and then that's where the pawns on the king side could be in trouble. However, she had the move rook f3 after that to protect the pawn. So that was a missed opportunity. You were absolutely right. She should have checked the king away.
Okay, rook f3 defend, and the black king is trying to get into c7 if it can. So anything, so something like rook c2 to help push doesn't work because there's king c7, and if the king comes back to the d file, then she checks again.
Exactly, and then we see a repetition because you do not want to give up the f7 pawn because that would also lose the e6 pawn, and so you go back to f3, and then white does not want to allow king to c7. So you were absolutely correct to check the king away, and the game objectively should have been a draw, but that's why I don't call things by results. I just say there are chances here, and that's why I use the word level. On that note, I feel like it's time for a break. I'm looking forward to grab a little bit of a bite, probably a banana in the break.
Healthy snack.
Healthy snack, and when we return, we will have the 3+1 time control of this FIDE Women's Speeches Championship match. It's so exciting, Alexandra.
I love that the matches have been so close today.
Me too. Can't complain one bit. So we'll be back shortly, everybody. Stay tuned. And we return here, and we are getting set for the 3-minute plus 1 second time control. Alexandra, it is a 2-2 match after Sarah won that fourth game. Who do you think is favored as the time control gets shorter?
Well, chess queen, aka Alexandra Kosteniuk. I guess that should have been the other way around. But yesterday in the interview, she did say how she didn't like bullet and it was her least favorite time control. I don't know how Sarah feels about it, but I think if we want Kosteniuk, I mean, not if we want Kosteniuk. If we think Kosteniuk is a favorite, then she should try to win as much as possible in the 3-0.
She did say that the 3-minute time control was her favorite because the 5-minute felt a little bit long for her, and she was saying half jokingly, as she is, playing classical chess at the highest level for such a long period of time now. But she's saying that the bullet isn't even real chess to her, whereas this time control, that's like the sweet spot. It's more of the traditional blitz time control.
True, but I will say that Kosteniuk's bullet is 2,500, whereas Sarah's is like 2,250. And of course, Sarah might not be actively playing on chess.com, but I think even if Kosteniuk isn't good at bullet, she's still a favorite.
Just anything
when she says she isn't good at bullet, that's when she says it. It's like when your friend who gets straight A's is like, "Oh, I did so terrible, got a 90."
I really disliked when people did that. It was incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, it was very tilting.
Now you're making us into nerds, right? We're like talking about our education, academic days.
Oh no, we're talking about our nerdy friends. We were the kids who were listening.
But the fact that we are in that environment is also kind of, whatever. We'll just move on.
Everyone has that one friend, I think, though. Anyway, okay, so here we go. 3+1 time control. Interesting opening here. I don't love Black's kingside pawn position. That doesn't look like the dream position for a king to castle into.
So, yeah, what is going on? So knight takes g7, the knight gets trapped over here, and that's why you're able to just give up this pawn, and the knight goes back to f4. That's not what Kosteniuk wanted. She did not want to bring her knight into e6 and then hop right back out.
Yeah, it's really surprising. I like that she's looking still towards the g6 pawn. What do you think happened there?
So, the knight was on g5, and so the knight got kicked and sort of forced into the action. And I'm interested in why Sarah's spending so much time here. Does she not want to castle queenside for some reason? Is she thinking, do I still castle kingside despite the loose g6 square? I would go to the queenside for sure.
Okay, you would castle queenside just because the other option is not as good, but she castles kingside. Is knight g6 not annoying? I guess that bishop on e7 isn't actually the best piece of all time.
Yeah, so instead of taking that, Kosteniuk says, I'll leave it there. As you're pointing out, it's not the best, but what about bishop d6 and the potential of attack on the king side over here? I feel like
bishop d6, right? Because then the knight has to go either backwards, which is super passive, or to g6, but then it's kind of awkward where it's going to go from g6.
Yeah, it feels like white just several moves down in development. Look at the queen side. There's a rook on a1, a bishop on c1 that can't move, and on the other side of things, Black has all of her pieces out and is coordinated extremely well.
Right. Okay, so she does go for knight g6. The rook is probably just going to move away. He can go to e8 since it's the semi-open file there.
Yeah, makes sense. I kind of wanted to keep that rook on f7, but I realized I couldn't do that without losing the e4 pawn. So that's why she went rook e8 and f4 played by Kosteniuk. That e5 square is where her knight's about to pop in, and there's no pawn for Black to kick it out ever.
Right. But, and I guess you can't take with the knight because then you're going to be pinned. And the knight on e5 would be really annoying, though, because it would kind of harass the queen on d7 as well. So what about a move like knight g4? So that if knight e5 you can take, you don't get pinned, and you just move the bishop back?
Yeah, you remove yourself from one attack, right? The pawn, if you take on e5, will fork the bishop and the knight on d6 and f6. And I was looking at queen takes f4. It looks really risky because you're walking into a discovered attack on your queen over here. But it does remove an important defender of this knight on e5. And I do want to remove that knight without having to capture it.
Oh, my heart rate's going up just seeing possibilities of discovery attack on the queen. I don't like it, Robert. Um,
Well, I thought you said that it makes people feel better when other people make the mistakes that they do, right?
that's true. That's true. It does. Um, I mean, can white just recapture on e4 and then win a pawn back in that line?
Yes.
So, so at least it wasn't a pawn down.
It probably wasn't good. I just really don't like this knight on e5. It's bugging me. But black
But
has.
there we go. So knight g4 and knight takes e5.
But look at black's clock. 30 seconds to a minute and a half plus.
We should get a clock counter in chat.
I think that black is fine though, because both sides have this weird configuration of like past pawns in the same file, the pawn e5 and pawn e4, and it's hard to collapse that pawn because white has this beautiful chain from b2 all the way to e5, and black is defended with d5 and e4 as well.
Right. It's definitely a little bit weird to see pawns on the opposite side, right? The pawn on e4 and the pawn on e5. We usually think the opposite there. And bishop g5, so you're really okay with those two double pawns because now if white ever gets into an endgame, g5 is going to be a serious weakness, and it just doesn't seem to me like there's enough compensation for it. Knight g3, don't allow the knight into f5.
The good thing about this pawn g5, and the real reason she did it, is to stop white's knight from getting to f4. So it looks bad as the pawns are isolated and doubled over here, harder to keep them defended, but it does restrict the enemy pieces. So black is trying to claim better piece quality in exchange for the worse pawn structure.
Okay. So rook f8 and wow, c4 is played. So white is opening up the position on the queen side as well, which makes sense, I guess, because if she can somehow get her rook onto c7, that would be much more active for her. But if the rooks trade off, she doesn't have to worry about her king side at all, and endgames tend to favor her a little bit.
And there she goes. Kasanik goes after b7, goes after d5, and the e4 pawn is hanging. So rook takes c8, and then knight takes e4. That's what's going to happen because the pawn on d5 is pinned to the king on g8.
And Kostyuk also in time pressure now, so 33 seconds to 18.2. Sarah winning the pawn back, but allowing
Queen.
No, never mind. I don't know. Queen c7 looks good, but it doesn't actually do that much.
Yeah, just it's about whose king is safer, and right now white's king is safer, but I'm worried after queen g4, rook to d2. Uh-oh. Here it comes. That's in a direct checkmate. What a turn of events here.
This reminds me of a game yesterday with Muzichuk, right? When she missed rook d2 and got mated on g2.
That's right. And she put a queen on h4 attacking this rook on e1. Also g4 is a threat. The pawn h2 is pinned, and the queen will defend this knight on e7. Here's g4, multi-purpose move. She makes a draw instead.
That seems kind of like a fair result after the up and down swings of this game, though.
Ooh. Oh, that was a really hectic one there. And I think that she just didn't have time to really calculate, but g4 would have protected the knight on e7 and put pressure on this pawn on h3. And I think that would have been a really strong choice there. It's hard to play with minimal time on your clock, 8 seconds.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. So, new opening, we have b3 without a bishop on b2, but yeah, okay, that's why it feels a little bit weird to me. What do you think about the b3 move here? Because you didn't even need to support c4.
It's a pawn on b3 is generally speaking pretty helpful just to keep everything defended. You're right, it was not necessary by any means, and it kind of wasted a move.
Because she could have played it at any point later in the game, just in the chance that she doesn't need it at all.
Yeah. She was worried about this knight e4 thing again, so she just protected it. She could have went knight c3 though, but very interesting. I agree with you. She should have started with knight c3 instead of playing b3. It ultimately would not cost her that much because the position is still very solid here for white. You have a great bishop on g2. Your queen is nicely centralized. No targets to exploit for black. So I would prefer white's position slightly. However, I think black is also pretty solid.
No, it reminds me of an interesting concept I read once, like in an opening chess book about chess players not being committal. So like trying to make the least committal moves and waiting to play it only when you really should do it. That's why it caught me off guard. But anyway, I think we've covered that point. So does white want to go for e4 at some point here, or is there some other major plan?
E4, F4, just expanding the center. That looks pretty good to me. And the question is, who is happy about the queen trade? Because right now the queens are being offered. White can swing the queen somewhere like h4 to try to keep on the board, but then you're just going to the flank and not really threatening anything. So I look at this. The bishop on g2 is the strongest piece on the board, Alexandra. That makes me happy about white's position.
True. And rook b8 so that the bishop on c8 can finally move. Oh, I can't wait for that white knight to hop onto d5. Unfortunately, it'll be traded. But that's such a beautiful square. I do love knight outposts.
Wanting to get the knight to d5, and that's why she put her rook on c1, is that after knight d5, if we trade, she'll take with the c pawn. But she had to play e3 first, as the knight was defending this pawn on e2 that was there. So she does get her knight to d5, and I don't think black wants to take there. That looks pretty shaky. Oh, she does it though.
C takes, open up the C set, the C file. C7 is now under attack. Rook C2 doesn't work right away, but she plays Rook D4 so she can go Rook C4. Wow. I mean, it's tied now. And Sarah's playing so well. I mean, we already knew she was extremely strong, but I'm very impressed.
This is her style. She gets these positions with a slight edge and then tries to nurse that edge into a full point. And here, b6 is the move that you play because the bishop on f5 does protect this rook on c8. Otherwise, rook takes b6 would be trying to blast up with the c file and take advantage of it. Ooh, I don't like that move because now a4 speaks to me.
So a4 you like because after b takes a4, I guess you can take with the b pawn and then rook b7 is coming in. And if not, I mean, the whole point is you're going to activate your rook, right?
Ooh, that was tricky. She went rook c6 to try to win the pawn, but rook couldn't take on b5 because bishop to d7 would have hit both rooks at once.
Okay, so we're seeing less blunders, which is nice. What about rook a6 now?
I like it.
Wins a no, it doesn't win a pawn because there's a4, and then the pawn is protected by the bishop on d7. But it's still annoying to deal with. Is it too slow for white to try and bring on her bishop over to attack the pawn on a4? Like bishop f1, bishop b2, bishop d1.
No, and she's actually, the reason she's not taking on a4 is she didn't want to give Kosteniuk the open b file. So she's saying, I know I would have left you with this pawn that was quite vulnerable and I had my rooks attacking the a4 square, but now my rook has the only open file on the queen side on a6, and I can slowly maneuver around the board.
Right.
Very good move by Kosteniuk, go g5. She needs counterplay. She can't just sit and do nothing.
Yeah, and even if it's not counterplay immediately, it's at least preparing it. Rook d4. So she wants to take on h4 back with the rook so that she doesn't create an isolated pawn. Sarah's really trying to fight against any counterplay Kosteniuk has.
She is. And she's, sometimes you play a little too cautiously. Here she's doing just the right thing. And this rook on c8 wanted to go to a8, but you couldn't with this pawn on c7 under attack. So now you can think about rook a8. However, c7 is lost. So rook 8, she's moving her king over. It makes sense. I like bishop f1, hitting b5. I think white's just stealing a pawn now, right?
Yep. That pawn on b5 is a goner, finally. So she did have that idea of bringing the bishop to come and help gain material, but she first wanted to make sure that Kosteniuk had no counterplay. And that's very in line with what you said about her. She had a small advantage, and she just didn't give any chance for Kosteniuk to get it back, at least so far. Although 28 seconds, so she has half of Kosteniuk's time.
She does, but her position is very easy to play. Like, it seems like a blunder-free type of position, and I know I'm going to eat my words.
There's no such thing, Robert.
I was waiting for it. I already had my snack, though, so I don't want to eat my words as well.
True.
This rook a4, look at this. She's just like, please take me. Give me that outside pass pawn. Then I'll push my pawn to a5. Here it comes. a5.
Okay, rook a4 to attack from behind.
It's funny. If you take on h4 with a rook now, I think white just goes f4 and traps your rook over here. Uh-oh.
Oh no! That's so cute though. So now the rook is going to have to come to g8, move the king up, and get to a8. But of course, ideally, you would be on a1. Because now there's rook b1 or king g2, right? Oh.
Okay, so the rook actually made its way. I thought the rook wouldn't be able to get there, but
Hmm.
I was mistaken. The rook does get to a1. White will put the rook on a8, and then the king comes to h4. Maybe it's not quite enough, because if the king goes to h4, well, now king h4 is good. The rook a3 was a big mistake.
Right, because,
You want to go rook h1 check when the king came to h4.
yeah, and now she can grab the pawn on h5, and then also bring her king closer to the f6 pawn.
Here it comes.
The rook is going to be tied onto the a pawn, making sure it doesn't promote. So let's say the rook is on a3, the white king gets to g6, king e7. What is the next step now? This is still kind of instructive. Oh,
Rook h8. Rook h8. Oh, not that. Uh-oh.
Rook h8. Wait, how? Okay, well, let's just keep going here. This is what I was concerned about. How do you get out of the checks?
You can't now, so I think this game is going to fizzle out into a draw.
Not another draw, Robert.
Don't blame me. It's not my fault. But let's.
Tell me more about blunder-free positions, please.
Hey, that wasn't really a blunder. There were no pieces lost. I'm going to go back really quickly and just show why I was saying to give up the a7 pawn. Because here, if you give up the a7 pawn, you have to take it for black, otherwise I get a queen. You take, and I have rook h7 check. I win the f6 pawn, and then I have a passed f pawn with an advanced king. So the winning chances are still entirely for white there. I'm not saying that white is completely won or anything. It just, you are pressing forward for the win, and at this point, it was your only choice.
Right.
So,
All right. Well, this is a very close match, and honestly, even these draws have been pretty wild games. So this is what we like to see. Close matches are the most fun. So I just shout out to the players for both being so excellent at what they do.
Yeah, they're really playing some awesome chess, and the first match today was very exciting with Humpy Conero taking down Ho Yifan, and this one between Sara Sadat, Kadem Al-Sharia, and Alexandra Kasteniuk, we couldn't ask for more. And no player in the universe is going to play perfectly, no matter who is in one of these matches. Mistakes do happen. That was a very well-played game, and Sara was pressing from the very early stages. She made her way to a position that was teetering on the edge of a victory, and Kasteniuk just was resourceful enough to challenge Sara, not make it easy for her, and then find that draw.
Yeah. Very, very Kosteniuk style to come back in certain swindles like that as well. So giving credit where it's due. So looking now at the current position, do you have a preference for either side here?
All right, so two bishops for white, but the worst pawn structure. That's a theme we've talked about a lot today, haven't we?
Yeah.
And, all right, so I would have a slight preference for white's position, because I'm generally speaking a fan of the bishop pair, and I don't think that the double pawns are weak. I think actually they're safe and sound for now. The question now becomes, what move do I come up with? And h3 was a good start, I'd say, but black should just retreat the bishop to h5 to keep the pin alive. I don't really know what white's plan is, I'm going to be honest with you.
Rook's on b1, get out of the pin with the knight. I guess it's all slow improvements, right?
Although this looks like a quick improvement for black after e4.
Oh, e4 is really sneaky. D takes e4 wouldn't have worked because bishop takes f3, I believe, would have killed white's king side, since if queen takes, the bishop on t2 is hanging. Oh, she still has it. Do you think she's going to see it? She just repeated the knight. Okay.
I think she's making a draw. She's the black pieces. She's
No. Oh, so Kosteniuk is going to be forced to not take it.
No, why can't Kasteniuk make a draw? Oh, she doesn't.
I just had a feeling she wasn't going to go for it. She has the white pieces and more time here, and she's considered the favorite. She also doesn't like bullets, so she probably wants to be the lead going in. But she has been very objective about her game, so she must like her position better.
How do you like those double isolated f pawns, and the isolated h pawn, and the double c pawns?
I mean, you're the one with the unpopular opinion that pass double pawns are good. Sorry. Whoa, I was surprised for a second with that move.
I was as well. I was waiting for you to finish your point about my unpopular opinions, though.
But it's kind of cool. I mean, now you have an unpopular opinion that's kind of instructive. You like doubled pawns.
I like double pawns.
Yeah, exactly.
You're right, though. I do. I like these double C pawns here that give a semi-open B file, and these double pawns on F3 and F2 have the redeeming quality that I don't know what redeeming qualities those double pawns have on F3 and F2. You're gonna have to help me come up with a lie.
The pawns on F2 and F3. I mean, the pawn on F3 is helping with the rook on E4. Now they're not even doubled anymore, so we don't have to talk about them. We got another rook and pawn ending. Who would have thought? Who would have thought that in this match we're gonna have another rook and pawn endgame? C4 offering up a pawn because if D takes C4, then she could continue with rook D4, attacking the C pawn and the E pawn. Certainly get one back.
This has been very well played and very instructive by both players. First, a couple moves ago, White sacrificed the pawn with c5 to open up the rook and go rook to b5 and attack things. Then Black sacrifices that pawn back. And often when you're up material, you're taught if your position is looking shaky, think about the move that gives that material back if it improves the dynamics of your pieces. And here it certainly did. Sarit seizes the pawn on e4. She can put her rook on e2 to go win the c2 pawn. And I think that when we do a quick material count, Black is currently up one pawn, and then two of Black's pawns are hanging. But if you take a5, you lose c4. So you should take c7 here, and then rook e2 comes, and you'll probably just win this first c pawn, and maybe even the second after.
Yeah, so White was attacking three pawns at the same time. Even if she's down a pawn, she clearly can get one back. Just even taking on c7 would work right away. And now she has two pass pawns, but okay, they're isolated, so she'll probably only have one because c2 is hanging after rook d1, c3, rook c2. But I don't know. I actually like White's position here.
I feel the opposite. I really like Black's position because I have a 4-on-2 majority on the king side, and your little extra pawn on the queen side they're not connected, probably not that easy to push. You should consider pushing the pawn immediately, even all the way up to c6, just to keep Black tied down to the defense of that pawn promotion. And otherwise, I don't really see what White can accomplish here, because rook a7 to take on a5, you're giving up both of your c pawns for the a pawn. I would rather push my pawn forward, use that one to get advanced.
Okay. I guess I see your point. And now f6 is going to help defend all of these pawns, not to mention 12 seconds versus 45.
That's a... Woof. Took on h4. Rook takes a5, then rook h5. There's no way White can lose this game.
I remember last time you said it was a blunder-free zone. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. Okay, so rook takes c4 looked pretty good, just getting the pawn back. Or h3 I like because it's distracting the white rook away. Rook takes c4 is an easy way to just grab the pawns back, but it does seem like Black was forcing a little bit. No, you're right. I think finally this one's going to be a draw as well.
Yeah, you just take on a4 over there. At some point, you're going to win this a pawn. Like rook c5 will win the a pawn, and Black is up a pawn, so we shouldn't dismiss that. However, endgame theory teaches us that when it's only one extra pawn and it's a rook pawns are good when they can be used as a distraction, when they're very far away from your enemy pieces, because the enemy has to go on a long journey to go after it. In a pure endgame, if these f pawns, say, get trade off the board, just having a rook pawn immediately results in a theoretically drawn position. That doesn't mean that it'll always be held, but you know that theory is on your side.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So that even if you can't calculate it, you just remember the basics and you play it so quickly like they have to in this now 10-second time control.
Yeah, this is now just a little shuffling. Don't play rook to g2 or rook g1 because rook g8 check would happen and you'd be pretty upset about that. King g3. I like that Sarah's playing on, though. She's up at pawn. Why not?
I actually wanted to ask, do you think either player would want to drag this out just so that, like, maybe they think they're better at bullet and they want this result to not be decisive?
I think they're equally nervous about bullet, and you don't really just want to rely on that. So the problem here for Black is you can't make progress. The rook cuts off the king, and you're going to go back and forth. The rook comes to h6. Just can't do anything.
I love the Monka W's as a result of the intense stare.
Of
in the chat of Kostenyu. Yeah, I mean, her focus phase is just so intimidating.
She's in the zone. Wait, rook h4? No, it doesn't work. That's a bad move. That would blunder. I almost lost the game. I went for a cheeky
It's
tactic.
okay, Robert. You're not playing. You can go for cheeky tactics. You can suggest them because you're only showing why they don't work, right?
I will show that after this game when it finally concludes. Trade rooks, king and pawn in game, complete draw. I hope we get a lesson in opposition here, though. That'd be nice.
Yeah, here we go. So whenever the pawn is in front of the king and you're not on the 3rd or 6th rank, it's always a draw chat.
Here we go. Perfect lesson in opposition.
There you go.
And a stalemate.
One more draw.
Draw is in the books. And let me just go back for a quick second to show the blunder I was trying to make, because it's important to show even our mistakes, especially our mistakes.
Hess is a master at sacrificing other people's pieces.
I wanted to play rook h4, and if king takes h4, play h2. This is a common tactic that gives up a rook to promote the pawn, but white had rook to d1 to stop the pawn in his tracks, and then white would have won. So rook h4 also wouldn't have worked as a king h2, but it would have lost the game on the spot because of king h4. So I got overexcited, I admit it. We now move into this game here. c4 just played by Alexandra Kostenyu. Big center for white, 2 bishops for black. We've seen this dynamic imbalance several times today. Alexandra, your thoughts about this position?
It's a funky position. Okay, the pawn structure is a little bit off. E3 is the backwards pawn, but d6 is also weak. C4 and b5 feel a little bit overextended to me, and I can't wait to play something like a4 here. At the same time, white's not able to castle just yet. Black is underdeveloped. Who do I prefer here? I also like the idea of just like knight d7, knight c5, and using those weak light squares on d3 at some point. You can't yet because of the bishop. I'm not sure.
The only thing I'm sure about here is I love the name of this opening, and I didn't know it until I just looked. I knew the Blumenfeld counter gambit.
Blumenfeld, okay.
But the Duz Kotomirsky variation. I'm like, well, I gotta play that. If that's the name of the opening, are you kidding me?
Blumenfeld counter gambit.
Well, the Blumenfeld, that's fine, but the Duz Kotomirsky variation, that just sounds empowering.
That's true. It sounds like a very intimidating defense.
Speaking of, well, it turned into an offense really quickly. She sacrificed her b5 pawn to play c3, and you have to take on c3. You can't afford to move your knight out of the way, because then the bishop will have a line against this king. The c5 square is amazing for this knight. However, is it worth the pawn that white is currently up?
That is a question that matters the most. Is black going to get enough piece activity here? To me, it seems like white should be able to develop. I mean, okay, first you have to move the rook, and then the light square bishop, and then castle. And if white is able to do that, there aren't actually so many weaknesses in white's camp, so I don't think it was worth it.
All right, so big if in terms of white finishing development. Rook to e3 comes to mind. Just bring, and then there's queen a1 check type of stuff. I have to be a bit careful. I'm trying to centralize my pieces, not realizing that, hey, there's actually some pressure down on the queen side.
Okay, so you can just play rook a2, can't go to a1 because the rook is hanging. Oh, she does play e3 anyway. So the only way to block on a1 would be to play queen d1. And chess queen doesn't even check her. Interesting.
You know what I would have done, actually? Instead of... I just want to take us back one quick move. I know e5 was a potential threat for white, but I would have played a5. And I'm creating a passed pawn for myself, and if you like take en passant, and I'm opening the a file for my rook, it just felt like a potentially devious move. And now we have a position where queen a1 check, queen d1, and we're seeing some trades here. And I don't think black's in any real danger, at least not yet. But this knight coming to d4 and into c... Maybe there is some danger. Take it back. That scares me. Knight d4. Throw that pony in.
Knight d4, and then where's it going from there?
C6.
Okay, c6.
Reservation for one knight.
Nice. What about white's king? It cannot leave the knight on d2, but the king needs to go somewhere so that the rook on h1 can develop, and the rook on h1 would be very important if chess queen is able to open up the queen side to make sure that the rooks aren't coming in and getting some kind of attack on the king.
Yeah, this a6 move actually is quite annoying because knight c6, there's a takes b5, and the rook is trying to get down to a1 to skewer white and win the rook on h1. Sarah down a minute on the clock. Position unclear. Extra pawn for white. Definite compensation for black. Would you take white's position or black's considering the time?
Black's position considering the time, just because even if I don't think she has that much compensation, I think her pieces, I mean, I didn't think so as much at first, but now her pieces are super active. White's king is still in the center, and she just has way too much more time.
Yeah, this is looking kind of awkward for white. I mean, this pin on the d2 knight is really annoying. Knight c6, you can just take on c6, down goes b6 after that. This is not what Sarah wanted, especially considering the disadvantage in the clock. So bishop d1 is a good move, I would say. Trying to ease the pressure. Oh.
Okay, so she's trading off here. The king finally moves out of that pin.
Can she take on d2 and play rook b2 check?
And win a pawn?
Yeah, putting a lot of pressure there.
Yeah, that actually looks really good. Because you can't play knight c2 to block the check because there's rook c8.
I would do that, but I think that she was smart to spend a lot of time before even making her move. No, this doesn't look as powerful.
1 minute and 11. How has she not castled? Asks Chuck. Well, sometimes these IMs don't castle. Simon also let us know that this is going to be their last game. I guess we could have already told that by the game. But whoever wins this is going to have the advantage going into the bullet portion. I think that's extremely important.
Are they allowed to win games? Haven't they made a million draws in a row?
Yeah, did we change the regulations or something, Robert? Is there like some penalty for winning?
It would seem to be the case. They have drawn all 3 games in this 3+1 time portion. They actually had all 4 wins, right? They split 2-2 in the 5+1. And here we see that this pawn on a3 is a thorn in white's side. You're tying white's rooks down to blockading it. This knight can come to b1, but you're not actually attacking it. The bishop on c5 is such a good piece, and it shows the dominance of bishops over knights. The bishop not only protects this pawn on a3, but it also puts pressure on the f2 pawn, looking in both directions. And now f5, I guess, is the intention. I don't know if I want to allow this knight into e4, though. So rook d4 check, just king c3. Knight takes e4. Take with a knight, for sure. Sack the exchange. Play rook d4 check and take on e4. That's what I would do if I were black. Not my pieces.
Yeah. Or not your time, right? 18 seconds. I feel
Told
like...
you.
Oh, but you're not supposed to sack in time pressure like that, right?
Don't tell me what to do, Alexandra.
I'm just saying, like, every time it's in bullet and, like, it's almost... It's definitely off more of the times, but who knows? Okay, you're right. She can probably still hold a draw here, actually, so it's not so risky. She's still up on time. That bishop is going to protect d6 and a3. Robert Hess is also always right, so it's going to be fine.
I think that white should have cut black's king off, and actually g4 it helps do that. But she should have put a rook on b7 instead of b8 and threatened some kind of back rank checkmates. Rook b7 check now, or rook e7. If king f6, there's rook f8 check, if you'd like it. Now we see a rook trade. And so black actually could lose this game if the white king jumps into e5, excuse me, f5. Wait, a2? There's rook 8, okay. So
Wait.
don't take on h6.
Oh, because then you can't catch the pawn because of the d5. Yeah, okay, makes sense.
Wait, 2 pawns are going. What's she doing?
No, I didn't. Wait, actually, was there a way to block that?
There was if she didn't steal all the kingside pawns. Ooh.
And Kostyuk does it again. Oh my gosh, so she's up by 1 point going into the bullet portion. That is an advantage for her.
So that exchange sacrifice won her the game by absolute force. There was nothing wrong at all, not even a sliver of hope for white. With
Well,
that
that's why I
exchange
changed
sacrifice.
my mind and said you're always right, Robert.
Let's go back to that moment. It's really instructive because the material was less important than breaking through. And after knight took on e4 on move 38, I'm threatening knight takes c5 in addition to knight f6 check with the fork. But I'm really trying to take on c5 and win your past a3 pawn. So because that pawn is tying down white's pieces, she went for the sacrifice. And this is the moment where I was recommending rook to b7. You cut the black king off so that you can try to bring your other rook in for a checkmating attack. And I think the sacrifice would have backfired had rook b7 been played. Instead, we saw the king shuffle. We saw the rooks ended up getting traded here. And at this moment, when white went rook to h8, she went all in for the win. trying to take h6, trying to take g5, but unfortunately black had 2 passed pawns to work with, and first came the black king, then that pawn marched all the way to d4, and once that pawn got to d4 with the threat of d3 and a2, these pawns are spread out, the white king can only do so much, and I think rook to g8 was necessary rather than rook takes g5 to get the rook to a8 behind the passed pawn. Instead she took on g5, and there's a check, and thank you to allow me to get this queen. Ooh. Wow. Yeah.
Well, I guess this is kind of what would have been the predictions for the game, but still extremely close.
Well, Alexandra, we got to take our break, our final break, because we're heading into the bullet portion. Before we go on the break, prediction: Kosteniuk going to win this match, or is Sara going to come back?
I think Kosteniuk is going to win.
Okay, well, no more needs to be said. Alexandra has made her prediction. Of course, she picks Alexandra to win. Shocking. And we're going to return in a few minutes with the bullet portion of this FIDEchess.com Women's Speeches Championship match. Stay tuned, everybody. And as we return here, we remind everybody about the leaderboard. Anna Ushanina has secured her spot in the super final. The top 2 players make it to that event on Monday, and she barely eked it out because Valentina Gunina finishes 1 tiebreak game behind her, and now Kosteniuk, Hou Yifan, Sara Kadem, all trying to leapfrog Gunina in second place. They will need to win this super final. Hou Yifan lost today, so she's out of it. So it just leaves Kosteniuk and Sara. They both need to win out.
Oh my God, Robert, it is so exciting. It's going to be the bullet portion. Kostanjuk, the rating favorite, the more experienced players, up by only 1 point. And in bullet, you know that anything can happen.
It's certainly true, and they both know what they need. They need to win this match and then win the final. A reminder to everybody that although they are 10 and 12 points respectively below the leaders, 12 points are available to the winner of a Grand Prix leg. So that's what's at stake. I'm bringing us back because the game is underway here, and we are starting the bullet. Kostanjuk gets the white pieces. I know you picked her to win. I think that is the safe choice. She's higher rated, and she has a 1-point lead, but I'm not going to count Sarah out, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'm not counting her out at all. It would just have to be like if you pick one who's more likely, but maybe something like 60-40, you know?
I would even go higher. I would say for Kostanjuk something like 75-80 because she is the higher rated player and has a point lead, right? And there's only 3 or 4 games that are played in this time control, but I actually like Sarah's position on the opening here. It was an Evans gambit, which is extremely risky for both sides. It's risky for white because you give up a pawn early in the opening. It's risky for black because look at how much play white has here, and now black's pawn structure is ruined as well.
Another ruined pawn structure. We can make a little mini lesson on doubled pawns today. But okay, we also have a backwards pawn on e4, but the knight on d4. Actually, sorry, it's not a backwards pawn because it can be defended by f3. The d6 pawn is the one that's weak. Bishop b2 now, and maybe some kind of discovery here.
Yeah, bishop b2, that looks good, trying to get an attack going. I also just want to play a queen. Oh, I can't go queen c7. My knight on d4 is hanging, but I want to play queen c7 and hit b6 and d6, which is probably why she retreated. Yeah. I'm looking at knight h4. White doesn't have too many pieces in front of her king, and knight h4 threatens bishop h3, just going all in for an attack, and there could be mate at the end of the road.
Yeah, you're right. The bullet player in me just sees a dirty trick and tries to go for it, but that's not the way they should play it. Interesting. So Sarah's going to have 2 isolated double pawns, which at this point are a weakness. And Kostanjuk is really doing a great job at defending her king over here. Do you see any actual threat after knight f4?
Bishop h3 is not mating just yet. It just scares me.
It scares you. Okay, yeah. That is kind of scary, bishop h3. Because how do you defend the g2 pawn?
You'd have to take it, and then my queen gets to h3, then you'd f3 at the end. So your queen is in the line to defend. That's the good news. Wait, bishop h3 now? No, it doesn't work. Okay, still doesn't work. I'm getting so... Ooh, walking into a pin! That's not good. No, this loses. Knight takes e4, and then bishop... can't play knight takes e4. The g2 is hanging with mate. So play bishop takes f4 first.
Right, and queen takes, then you take the queen? No, because then you get mated.
No, you take the queen. You have knight f1 was available at the end. So this also works. Crazy tactics happening.
That was so fast. That was so fast. All right. 5.5, 3.5. Oh, man. The gap is widening.
It is. And Kostanjuk is locked in right now, by the way. I'm going to bring her up on camera in a quick second here. But she is locked in, ready to take this match.
Okay. What b3 and queen b2? Are we fianchettoing queens now? All right, we're getting a little bit creative up in here. That knight on e4 is really annoying. I can't wait to play knight d2 and try to kick it out, but then there's d5 or f5.
And b4 is a good move by Sarah. She needs to gain some space. The queen is fianchetted, as you said. It looks a little strange over here. It does help the queen side advance, though. So e5, I need to break open the position a little bit. Otherwise, I'm getting squeezed. I don't have enough space. The side with less space often wants to trade some of the pieces so that her pieces are not stepping on each other's toes.
Right. Okay, and Kostanjuk is actually the one who's lower on time here. Sarah has the bigger center as well, but she's going to have to be careful about a kingside attack, which I always overvalue in bullet. She finally was able to trade off the knight in the center, though, so that's some good progress here.
And she's going for that pawn storm on the kingside. I really like what you just said there, though, about how you overvalue the attack. I'm the same. I'm looking at my king safety. That's paramount, and I sort of forget all else while looking at that side of the board. And this is actually, I think, a bad dynamic for white because the queen side is locked up. You can't actually break it open. You've all 8 pawns remaining. So now she's switching back over to the king side. She'll probably try to play f3. and black isn't fully developed. So if you can break everything open in the next
Right.
few moves, you may be able to strike first.
Okay. Queen g5 putting pressure on e3. You don't defend it with your king. You gotta defend it with your queen. Okay, very nice move over here.
And queen c3 was nice because it also protects a5, just in
True.
case.
Just in case f4 is pushed and there's some sneaky business. Chat, are you feeling the intensity right now? Shout out to everybody who's watching. This bullet is gonna determine who has a chance to qualify. Well, if Kostanuk has a chance to qualify for the finals, it's winner take all here, and the prize money, right?
Yeah, that was so morbid. This bullet will decide. Like, whoa. Whoa.
This bullet, yeah, you're right. I forgot about that. Oh my god.
It's like, don't do it,
Russian
Alexandra.
roulette.
It's not worth it. Don't do it. Oh my gosh, knight f2, smother checkmate.
Oh no, and rook f1 doesn't work because you lose it.
So she moves the rook away, and then knight came to e3, trying to take this bishop, open up the light squares. One thing that black has to keep an eye on is that the queen on a3 is... Oh, there's a lot of pressure here on both these pieces. I was about to say the queen on a3 is hitting some of these minor pieces.
Okay. How white survived this a little bit longer than I expected, actually. But now the queen is coming in, and there's discovery attacks. And there's bishop f1 and discovery attacks. Oh no. Chess queen is running away with it. If she wins this...
Queen e2 check, king h3, only move, bishop f5 check.
Sorry, I call her chess queen by habit sometimes just because of her username.
It's okay. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right. Chat, I know you... Oh, chat sees her username too. Okay. Otherwise, it looks like I'm really giving favorites here. And the queen takes it again.
Oh my gosh, and she just like, kind of gathers herself. There's only 4 minutes remaining. It's a 3-point lead. I think that has it locked up. It seems like Alexandra Kostanuk. She is a popular streamer. She does stream on the Twitch channel Chess Queen, right?
So sometimes in Russian and in English, yeah.
She does. She does some commentary. She's streaming her own games. And right now, she is working her way to the final of this 4th Grand Prix stage. She needs to win. She has no choice but to keep on winning.
Right. Okay, so the bishop on d3, that's unusual to you too, right? To see it so far out, not near its pawns. The king is still in the center of the board.
Very unusual. And it's now going to be captured.
Right. So I guess she can take back this works as well. The black king also can't castle because of the bishop on b3, so she has to do something about that, which is why she pushes c5 to go for c4. But now can the bishop it can't go to d5, it'll get taken. Can the bishop go to e6 to try to keep black stuck in the center of the board?
Yeah, she certainly can play that. She takes on d3, so after c4, losing a piece, but claiming that the black king being stuck in the center is worth it.
Just blocks everything?
Yeah, I like d5 a lot. In fact, right now d5 also works. She reads next to g6. Now d5. Finally, the king is castling. Queen d7. Exactly. Trade the queens off. Now black is up a piece in endgame, but there are 2 pawns for that piece. There's actually pretty decent compensation as you have the bishop pair.
Yes, you have the bishop pair and 2 pawns, but having a piece for 2 pawns is probably usually more like a +2 position, right? When you actually, from all of the positions I've evaluated like that, so I just don't think a bishop pair is enough to make up for that.
Did you just speak to me in computer evaluation? You really
No. +2 as in it's worth more than one piece value. I wasn't talking like a computer. No, please, blundered. Robert, don't hate me.
She blundered, and I was about to say you put the bot in Botez right there with that kind of computer language. First you're asking me questions about like infinity calculations yesterday. I don't know what's going on with you.
I'm sorry, man. Oh, okay. But you know what I was trying to say though.
I do, and right now.
Right now, she blundered, though. Sorry, go ahead, Robert.
The piece was regained. It's because bishops are tricky. Having the bishop pair was hard to deal with, and Kostanuk wins the piece back, and now is up 2 pawns, and is also up 3 games in the match, and there's only a minute and a half left. She's got this one.
Yeah. And the gap is just too big. Oh, man, it's kind of hard to force them to keep playing. Like, is it even possible for Sarah to come back at this point?
Nope, it's impossible, mathematically.
Because how much longer do they have?
They have a minute.
Oh, a minute. Okay. I was gonna say that it would be the most cruel thing to make them keep playing when she knows she's lost.
No, no, no. It's a minute, 55 seconds about on the match timer. So this probably the second to last game. I think actually, if this game finishes soon, then we will have time for one more, and that's just not really. It's for the glory, not for nothing else.
Right.
Wow, White is up 3 pawns now.
And so Kostyuk is quite a bit older than Sarah. And usually it's the younger players who tend to have the advantage in the shorter time controls. But I think it's so impressive how sharp Kostyuk has stayed throughout. I think she's 32.
I don't know.
I'll look up randomly.
You can look it up. I'm also being told that my clock was a little bit off. The actual timer is up.
Oh, 36. Sorry.
I started a little late, and so the match is over. Kostyuk wins 7.5, 3.5, and because she is making her way to the final, it actually the game points no longer matter because I'll pull up once again this scene here to show that if you win first place in a Grand Prix leg, you get 12 points in addition to $3,000. Okay, so we know that that's the prize. That's the amount of Grand Prix points. I'll pull back the standings again here to show you that if Kostyuk wins first and gets 12 points, she ends up with a total of 24. So it doesn't matter the tiebreaks. Her tiebreaks are amazing. She's been beating up on people. Oh my gosh, I didn't even notice that. And so Kostyuk, with a win over Humpy Canero in the final, will make it to the super final against Anna Ushanina. If she loses to Humpy, then Valentina Gunina can breathe again and be like, I lost to Humpy, but Humpy did me the favor in the end by allowing me to qualify for Monday's super final.
Yeah. So, do you have any favorites between people who will make it to the final?
Well, Ushanina is going to be there. I don't know who's going to face her. So I think that, Kostyuk has to beat Humpy Canero. Humpy just beat Hou Yifan today. I do think that Humpy's time management makes me nervous about a potential situation where they're getting into bullet, and that could be an issue. So actually, I'm being told that we are going to bring Kostyuk on for an interview, so we will have to take a break, get her set up, and when we return, we will have Alexandra, well, 2 Alexandras and 1 Robert in for the call. So stay tuned, everybody. We'll be right back. Alrighty, I am joined by both Alexandra Botez, who I've been with, and Grandmaster Alexandra Kosteniuk. Alexandra, congratulations on another very impressive victory.
Thank you.
How are you feeling after what was a really tough match, especially in the 3 minute portion where you were drawing the first three games and then you won that final game to take the lead?
Yeah, well, I feel tired. Need to have some rest, I believe.
Oh, that's actually very fair. These matches must be so exciting. What do you usually do to unwind after?
Well, I'm with my daughter right now, so I have to take care of her. So it keeps me busy. And but usually, if I can, I prefer to go for a run.
Does your daughter watch your matches?
No, she's busy with her own matches, not chess, but tennis ones.
Oh, okay.
Are you gonna teach? Does your daughter know how to play chess as well?
Yeah, she knows how to play chess. She even participated in some youth tournaments when she was 4 or 5. But I mean, kept. She keeps repeating, "I hate chess," so I didn't really, I didn't really see the point to push her towards it if she has such strong feelings. So yeah, so she's in other kind of sports.
And I think that's a phrase we've all repeated many times. And in this match, early on, in the 5 minute portion, you were trading victories. I mean, what was your mentality like as you shifted from time control to time control? Because ultimately, in the bullet is where you really crushed in one-sided in terms of the scoreboard. But how were you feeling earlier on in the match?
Well, I was not happy about my play because, well, for example, in the 5 minute portion, the fourth game, I mean, I just actually was pressing too hard. Of course, it was a drawish position, but I had a big time advantage. And I pressed too hard, and then I started missing small tactics. Actually, early on in the first games, I missed a lot of small tactics. Sometimes she noticed, sometimes she didn't notice, but I noticed. That kind of made me worry. But then, yeah, I mean, then all is well that ends well.
Absolutely. And I noticed that as well, that there were some moments when you were forcing positions that looked a little bit more drawish, and sometimes it wouldn't go your way. Would you say that's something that happens to you more in a match format because you're trying to get a higher amount of points?
Well, I don't know. I think it just happens to be my style. For me, it's easier to go forward, and sometimes if you have a worse position, you need to defend and make small moves, waiting moves, and I mean, going forward sometimes equals a suicide. And but in a blitz game, you tend to, to to move forward, especially with my style. So that's why it's not very pleasant for me to defend such positions. But at the same time, it happens. It happens that you just get them, and if you don't want to resign, because I mean, every single half a point can save you the match. So you really need to work as hard as you can, even though, of course, I mean, people prefer to have better positions.
Right.
Yeah, I do say that often, that sometimes playing for a win is playing for a loss, and especially with no time on your clock, the retreating moves can be difficult to play when you're in just the midst of a game. But I have a question. I know you say you're tired. We want to let you go soon, but you're playing Humpy Canero tomorrow. Not tomorrow. Excuse me. You have a day off tomorrow, so enjoy your rest. But on Sunday, you will be playing her. You must have played her many times by now. What are your feelings going into that matchup, and what are you going to do to prepare?
Well, first of all, yes, I'm gonna rest. But actually, tomorrow I have 2 broadcasts in Russian scheduled.
Oh, wow.
So not so much of a rest, but and we have a training session with my Russian national team going on. So it's kind of I don't know how I will handle. But anyway, if we talk about Humpy Conner, of course, she's a very solid player, and she definitely, I mean, is she won against Valentina and then against Hui Fan. Nobody expected it. Probably she herself didn't expect it. but it just shows that she's capable of showing a great result even in blitz. Although definitely classical chess is her, well, should be her preference. She's a very strong player.
And we noticed that in a lot of Humpy's games against Ho Yifan, she was often in time pressure. So she'd have, around 20 seconds on the clock when Ho Yifan had around a minute and 10 seconds. Is there anything you try to do to adapt your style to players who often get in time pressure in rapid formats?
Well, the most important thing is to get good positions because it's very difficult to defend with seconds on the clock.
Right.
So you just try to keep the pressure and keep the position tense, and then use this time advantage that you might have.
Well, I think that's definitely a good way to play. And I was going to say enjoy your rest day. I was going to let you sign off, but enjoy your very eventful day off from the WSEC, but broadcast and training. So where will you be doing the broadcast? On your channel?
On Chess.com.ru.
Okay.
Because actually I signed a contract, we can say, with chess.com from July 1st to develop the Russian platform. So I'm doing a lot of things for chess.com.ru. Mm-hmm. And tomorrow two broadcasts are planned. The first one is the final of the Lyon Chess Festival Young Masters. I'm not sure who qualified. I think Yesipenko qualified. Who qualified yesterday, I'm not sure. There were 2 Russians. So hopefully, well, at least one of them qualified. And then we have this Grandmaster versus SUP scheduled. Hopefully Jan Nepomniachtchi will join us tomorrow night and play with Chess.com subscribers. So wow. If you happen to know Russian, you are welcome to pass by. Even if you don't speak Russian, it's okay to to go to Chess.com.ru channels and try to play against Jan, since we all speak chess language.
That's true. I take solace in that because my Russian, I took it in college for a couple of years. It's terrible. So I will understand maybe one every 30 words or so. No, probably a little more.
So you see, you need to practice.
Oh.
Practice is the key to success. So,
yeah. I hope so. So I will tune in. I hope everybody does as well, especially for our Russian speakers in the audience. And Alexandra, I want to congratulate you once more. And thank you so much for joining us for this interview.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that was Alexandra Kostenyuk, everybody. She won her match against Sarah Kadem. There will be more chess on Sunday. You see the schedule that I put up before you here. It will be on July 19th, 5:30 a.m. Pacific time. So same time, same place. We are going to enjoy more Women's Speeches Championship action. And, well, Alexandra is like, come back to us. Everybody knows what's going on Sunday now. How are you feeling? You have a day off tomorrow. Do you have like 3 different Russian streams that you're going to do?
Not Russian streams, Robert, but I will definitely be streaming today and tomorrow and on Sunday and every day of the week. So I'm around, chat. I'm around.
And I am going to enjoy my day off. It seems like I'm the only one, but I've also been covering this event from the very beginning. So I won't say I earned it or deserve it, but I'm going to enjoy it nonetheless.
Robert. Give yourself more credit occasionally, yeah?
Oh, so supportive. And I actually just want to give Alexandra Kostenyuk one more shout out. She is the chess queen, is her stream on Twitch. And she's such a kind person, and she's really thoughtful. And I love the way she approaches the game. She clearly is a huge student in addition to being an amazing player. She is commentating tomorrow. She's training with the Russian team. What more could you ask for an ambassador for the game? So I want to give her a shout out. Of course, Sarah Kadem played a very tough match here, hung in there for a while. It all went downhill in that final 3-minute and then the bullet section. So she deserves our praise as well. So does Humpy Koneru, who, as Grandmaster Kostenyuk just said, well, she beat Valentina and beat Oyifan back-to-back days. Pretty impressive stuff.
Absolutely. Well, Robert, it's been a pleasure commentating with you as always. And thank you so much to everybody who's been tuning in. I hope you guys were able to learn a little bit.
On that note, it's time that we say goodbye. Don't be too sad. We'll be back shortly for more chess. In the meantime, Alexandra, I want to thank you, as always, for being an amazing co-commentator, for making my job not really feel like a job. It's just a lot of fun. So thank you so much for joining for the call, and I'm looking forward to Sunday when we do this once again. Bye, everybody.
Sorry, I thought that was the exit.
I was waiting for you to respond, but I guess, okay, nope, that's the exit.
No,
We're gone.
You were responding to mine. Okay,
Yep,
bye,
yep.
everyone.
Bye. See ya.
Bye.